Hi guys. I made a paid service in Telegram where you will find a great collection of fanfiction audiobooks organized and regularly updated. What you get? An unlimited access to the full audiobook library. New fanfiction audiobooks added regularly. You can play audios directly from Telegram anytime. Joining our service is available through a monthly subscription of $5. You can pay using PayPal or Ko-fi. So what are you waiting for? Send me a message on Telegram or Discord. I will provide the payment details. After the payment is confirmed, you will receive access to the private Telegram channel containing all audiobooks. If you enjoy fanfiction and prefer listening instead of reading, this library is made for you. Message me anytime to join.
51. Hitting the books. 2. A flash of surprise crossed his face at my rebuttal, but he sneered, "Very well, then tell me what would I get if I were to add powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" He said firmly. "Draught of living death, a powerful potion of forced slumber so deep it could be likened to death itself." I said without issue. "What are the differences between aconite, wolfsbane and monkshood?" He tried again. "Same plant but different names." I answered casually. "And where would I find a bezoar if I wished for one?" He asked finally. "In the stomach of a goat, a cure for most poisons and always handy to have on hand just in case." I said without trouble. "You must think yourself so clever for having memorized a single book. Unfortunately your so-called mastery is insignificant in comparison to a true potion master. You do well to remember that in the future. Let us begin properly now," he said with an almost regretful glint in his eyes, but chose not to continue making things difficult for me. His quiz was a bit more difficult than the others as he actually wanted me to mentally simulate the brewing of the cure for Boyle's potion. He asked where I learned some of the little tricks I spoke of when speaking each step of the process. I explained that I had purposefully sought out the second-hand copies of my textbooks with notes scrawled in the margins to learn from the experiences of my seniors. He actually seemed genuinely pleasantly surprised by this. He was still brutal with his criticism when I made a mistake no matter how tiny, but he was also professional and would explain how to correct it right afterwards. Since I chose not to look at him through the bias of a child who wouldn't know better, I noticed this detail and had to admit he got an unfair shake in the books. Yes, he was absolutely a harsh and brutally blunt teacher. But he took his job of teaching extremely seriously as well, because after his rebuke he'd tell you exactly how not to make that mistake again. Once you managed to stomach his personality, you'd find he was actually an extremely good teacher. I ended up having to rebrew the potion 3 times before he found my brewing flawless and thus satisfactory. He left after telling me he'd arrange an appropriate book to add to my reading list. I was actually glad when Madame Pomfrey came to do her thing after that, as my nerves were tense from the hard drill instructor vibes the guy gave off. I could handle it thanks to my previous life, but I could definitely see how his mere presence could cause children to make mistakes. Finally things quieted down as I simply had no more professor visits until at least 3 days later. My recovery was going smoothly as well, as while I still hurt quite a bit to move my hands, the pain was easing up every time I awoke from my potion-induced slumbers. Third-person POV, One Piece world. "Why are we heading to this sky island anyways, Marco?" A member of the Whitebeard pirates asked the second-in-command Marco curiously. Marco was a relaxed-looking man in a pair of floral shorts and a Hawaiian-style shirt with tan skin and orange hair like a pineapple's leaves. "Pop's weird merchant guy wants the devil fruit the local big shot there has, and Pops wants us to grab the sucker and bring him back for it," Marco said relaxed as he lounged in a chair on the deck of the ship. "Can we trust this merchant person? Only Pops has ever seen him, and even after the whole teach and restoring Pops to health things, I find it hard to trust someone I've never met." The crewmate said honestly. "Don't need to trust him. Pops does, and we trust Pops. That's all we need ya." Marco said casually. "Yeah, I guess so. Still think the whole situation is nuts. Guy is apparently a wizard from another world who knows an unexplainable amount about our own and trades things with Pops from that world, others too eventually if Pops is right," the crewmate said, scratching his head in confusion. "The world's a strange place sometimes, but I'm not complaining in this case. Things have been extra smooth since Pops got his health back to its peak, yeah," Marco said with a lazy grin. "Yeah, Kaido got a nasty shock in that last battle when Pops beat him down. Feels good not to have to keep giving up territory," the crewmate said with a grin. "Would have been even nicer if that guy Morgans hadn't gotten the news of Pop's recovery. Might have even gotten back some of our old territory before the other Yonko shored up their defenses," Marco said with a slightly regretful tone. These type of conversations weren't new in Whitebeard's crew these days. The appearance of this mysterious merchant in contact with Whitebeard had changed everything. First, Blackbeard was exposed and killed by Whitebeard after a long clash. That earned the merchant a tidy sum of gold and the devil fruit Blackbeard held, as well as the old pirate's trust. After that it was a few named weapons, haki, and the unique physique people had in this world. In this exchange Whitebeard got that elixir that restored his body's health to its peak. For the Whitebeard pirates this alone was the greatest news ever and gave their crews slowly fading glory a second wind, as with the old pirate taking the front line again their hemorrhaging of territory was stopped. The world government elders themselves had even sent CP agents to find out how Whitebeard recovered so swiftly and obtained this resource for them. The elixir was long since gone though, and even the residue of it had been taken care of, as Marco tried to recreate it for a while but gave up when he simply couldn't make any progress. 52. Repetition. Time flowed ever forward, and by my count another 3 days came and went and my recovery was steady and clear. My eye was certified useless finally, as even after all the potions and careful watch there was no improvement. I am truly sorry that you have had to experience such a loss due to a moment of carelessness. If you would like I can craft you a prosthetic, much like the one worn by Alistair Moody. Free of cost of course. Dumbledore offered kindly as he wanted to give me the news himself. I shook my head. I will find a way to deal with it on my own. It's not as though I am blind after all, I said calmly. He sighed. You really are too mature for your age. Should you ever change your mind you know where to find me, he said seriously before leaving. Beyond that nothing stood out to me, as I received no visitors and my days were spent either unconscious or reading the books given to me for my studies. I couldn't really practice my magic, and my practice with observation hacking ended abruptly with a sudden headache due to that damnable spell Madame Pomfrey used when she felt it. I got some practice with armament hacking, but besides gaining a bit more stability when I deployed it there was little progress there. I didn't dare try and use Conqueror's hacking at all lest Madame Pomfrey get caught in the crossfire. Finally, right before my usual dosing time to end the night, the world grayed out and a screen appeared with Whitebeard sitting in that chair of his like always. Gururera, sorry for the wait. Took Marco slightly longer than I thought to get to the Sky Island and back. You weren't lying about that Enel fellow being arrogant. Marco said. The guy didn't even try to dodge. Must not have known about armament hacking despite his pretty impressive observation hacking, he said with a laugh. I scoffed. His observation hacking is actually terrible. He just cheated and mixed it with his devil fruit so he could spread it much farther is all. Did Marco solve the problems with the locals too, or just grab Enel and split? I asked curiously. Solve the war between them if that's what you mean. Some fellow by the name Gonfall helped a lot there. You didn't mention it was the City of Gold though, or that there was a poneglyph either, he said pointedly. I shrugged. Why would I? Gold is easy to get for you and you have no interest in the poneglyphs or the information they record. I doubt Roger didn't tell you anyways with your relationship, I said casually. Gururera, one of these days I'm going to have you tell me how you know so much. Still should probably get this done with so you can rest. The sooner you get better the sooner we can trade some interesting stuff from your world, he said with a grin. Alright, so long as he can technically be considered something belonging to you, just focus on giving me the fruit and it should go through, I said, and his expression shifted to one of focus before a message from the system popped up. Trading partner, Edward Newgate wishes to give the user items, treasure, devil fruit, Goro Goro no Mi, ability stone, Haki X1, ability stone, 1 piece physique X1 accept items Y/N. I accepted the trade and immediately the items appeared in my inventory. I didn't ask for the Haki or physique, but thanks anyways. Having extras will give me something to sell if the right customer comes along, I said, genuinely grateful. I figured I may as well give them to you since you won't need them anymore. I'm tossing him into the sea. After that his life and death have nothing to do with me, Whitebeard said dismissively. Fair enough I suppose. Without his devil fruit he's not a threat to anyone anyways, so I don't care either way, I said, not bothered by the idea. I'm not some innocent child who can't read between the lines of how common murder is in that world, even if you rarely actually see someone die. In the whole series I think you see it directly at most a handful of times. Like there's Roger's execution, Ace getting a donut and Whitebeard shortly following were the standouts. Sometimes it looked like someone was killed only for them to later pop up. Despite this I knew for a fact death was far more commonplace than we saw. Besides that I was an adult in all but body, I could live with the morality of my choices. You rest up now alright? I should have the first batch of fruits in a week or so, he said before ending the contact. Almost immediately after the screen went away and the world returned to normal, Madame Pomfrey appeared with the usual. When I woke up again I immediately checked to see if I was alone. Once it was clear I opened my inventory and pulled out the Goro Goro no Mi. It was surprisingly small in truth, as I could almost fully close my fingers around it. From the shape it looked like it might have originally been some kind of small plum. Whatever it was originally, it was now a bright yellow with swirl scale patterns that ended with jagged points like lightning bolts. I grimaced as I knew this thing was going to taste absolutely terrible, but stuffed the whole thing into my mouth and shuddered as I chewed it up. I honestly can't describe the flavor beyond foul. Horribly, stomach-rebukingly foul. It took every last ounce of my willpower and nearby 10 minutes of suppressing my body's vomiting reflex to get past it. It was so bad I would have begged Madame Pomfrey for more potion just to wash the taste out of my mouth. I can't say it was in vain however, as I lifted my hand and with but a thought an arc of blue electricity shot between my fingers. It was so easy that I was genuinely caught off guard. It was almost like an extra limb that I always had but never noticed until now. I didn't need more than a single intention for the power to work. I'd obviously need to refine it and experiment with it, but that was more a time issue than anything. 53. Plans and concerns. I couldn't exactly hide the new power I had from Madame Pomfrey unless I just didn't want to practice with it, so I didn't. She was astonished by the sight of the bright arcs of electricity jumping along my hand as I played with the power, and even Dumbledore and the other professors were called to the hospital wing in hopes of figuring out what was going on. It's unusual, close to how a magical gift such as Metamorphagus behaves, yet there was no signs of it previously. There are tales of those blessed with talent for elemental magic, but this is clearly something else. He said seriously, "Is it safe, Albus? This is lightning magic after all, a branch of spells notorious for their unruliness." Flitwick asked concerned. "It doesn't seem unruly to me," Snape pointed out flatly as I shaped the lightning into balls, squares and pyramids unbothered by the scrutiny. "Could it be because of the spear?" McGonagall suggested, equally unsure. "It is possible, I suppose. Magical items like that can hold unpredictable effects at times. It's possible that through his bond to the weapon, that as his health returns it is allowing him access to some new ability it generated within him." Dumbledore said with a troubled look. "I certainly wasn't going to explain about the devil fruits to them, as I haven't left the hospital wing in well over a week, and I definitely wasn't going to expose the system like an idiot like that. Of course once the Greengrass sale went through, word of the fruits will inevitably get out, but by then it wouldn't matter. I would definitely be out of the hospital wing and have had some time to get practice with my new powers." Even in one piece it was stated that devil fruits were only limited by the imagination of the users, and I had a vast imagination and pool of inspiration to draw from thanks to my countless video games and animes consumed. I knew how Enel used the fruit and could say definitively that he barely tapped the surface of its true abilities. The most creative thing he did with it was his hacky trick and 200 million volt Amaru transformation. That form was more or less taking advantage of the Logia's elementalization to make himself bigger and thus hit harder. Like every other thing he did, it was a crude and brutish use of the power that could perform much better with precision instead. Perhaps manipulating the nerves in a body to mimic mind control? Why not stimulate the cells with low-end electricity to grow your physique like the Raikages in Naruto? What about electromagnetism? The sheer amount of wasted potential held by this fruit was mind-boggling when Enel held it. Now that I had it, I wouldn't make that mistake and might even be able to awaken the fruit through thorough exploration of all it was capable of in time. For now though, I was still very new to the powers and would need at least a little time to really start excavating the full extent of the power. Of course even now I was likely the second most dangerous person in the entire room behind Dumbledore, since I could still throw a max power lightning bolt with no warning. All Logia fruits were like this when first eaten. The surge of pure power they gave was massive right out the gate, even more so for the Goro Goro no Mi. Naturally this was the most basic form of lightning at the moment, but even just that was more than enough to kill the average wizard before they could blink. If caught off guard, even Dumbledore might perish in an instant if struck by lightning. What came as a surprise to me was that the fruit's power was magical in nature. Like it seemed obvious in hindsight what with the way they worked, but I just hadn't given it that much thought. It was one of those things where you just assume it was unique to that world and then move on. This kind of made me curious if Zoan fruits were animagus transformations. Maybe a more advanced form of the art even? This begged the question if I could even do this world's form of the art now that I had a devil fruit, or if the devil fruits gave a limited version of magic to the user through the devils within them, and if I just took the traditional path I'd be fine. This required experimentation, and I happened to know of a certain rat that would serve well for such a test. Of course I'd have to wait until after the 4th year's events in canon if I didn't want to totally derail things. Then again, if I grabbed him during the 3rd year, would Voldemort ever come back? And if not, would that be such a bad thing? I thought with a slight frown. Not to worry, child, your health is still on the mend. Madame Pomfrey said, apparently mistaking my frown for concern about my health. Oh, sorry, I was lost in thought actually. I was wondering how this would work with my peers is all. Children can be cruel, jealous things when you are special after all. I said, making a convincing excuse. Speaking from experience, are we? Regardless, that is indeed a valid concern. Snape said sternly. Yes, I believe we have a graduating student who suffered a similar trouble. Miss Nymphatora Tonks, a natural metamorphagus. She solved the trouble with her outgoing and playful disposition. A trait young Alex here unfortunately does not possess. I fear that this uniqueness, in addition to his aloof personality, would only make other students less friendly towards him. Dumbledore said with a concerned look. 54. Future-proofing. Unfriendliness I can handle on my own. My concern is the lengths the pure bloods might go to out of some absurd sense of jealousy or bigotry. I said honestly. I truly meant it too, as merely being isolated would eventually be fixed as my possible stock from other worlds becomes available. The real problem came from those stuck with the idea that because they had pure blood and I didn't, they should be better, more talented and richer than me. For the mild ones that would perhaps hurl insults or seethe angrily at me I could ignore. The real problem came from those that wouldn't accept it and take action to deal with me. Perhaps not kill me exactly, but cripple or frame for a crime. Nobility doesn't have a great track record in these affairs after all, and my concern was quite valid. The worst part, however, is that I know if I ever fell into such a trap I'd not go to Azkaban for very long, if at all. I was a Logia user, and I guarantee if a mere animagus could escape from that place, a Logia would have it much easier. Especially me, since I had lightning as my power. The very air was filled with electromagnetic waves at all times. Using those in elemental form I could fly through the sky at speeds the naked eye couldn't follow. Being given the serious black treatment because of a frame job was something I'd very much like to avoid if possible. However, would not showing these new abilities to others not suffice? Flitwick asked, and I shook my head. At that point I may as well not have them at all. It would be like asking you not to ever cast another spell in front of someone else ever again. I said seriously. I'm afraid young Alex is correct. Hiding away one's gifts to avoid persecution tends not to end well. Case in point, Obscurus. Though perhaps there is a more moderate option here. Rather than hiding it, young Alex could instead limit his usage of it in front of others. To his peers mere parlor tricks, but the truth known only to him and us. Dumbledore suggested. What of the Ministry? Surely such an ability would need to be documented in case it ever appears in another, perhaps even his own descendants. McGonagall questioned seriously. That won't be necessary for now. I have no intention of pursuing even the faintest notion of romance for many years if ever. Should this change naturally, documentation might be in order, but not now. I said, immediately rejecting that idea. I very much doubt the minister would take kindly to an undocumented ability user running about. McGonagall said sternly. Perhaps, but it's not illegal, so respectfully he can stuff it. I said with a shrug. A crude method of phrasing it, but understandable. Dumbledore said with a slightly amused smile. I'm not saying the position wasn't one deserving of respect, but I prefer to judge people based on their actions rather than their positions. Cornelius Fudge is a political beast, a selfish one lacking personal skill at that. All of my research on the man tells me that beyond that position he is not worth the air he breathes. I said bluntly. An apt description. Snape said with what I could have sworn was a hint of genuine approval. One should not speak ill of others behind their backs. I expect better of you, Alex. Flitwick chided sternly. Of course, apologies. Still, on the matter of limiting my usage of my new ability, I see nothing wrong with it. I never intended to use much of it publicly to begin with. I said truthfully. The Goro Goro no Mi was meant to be a sort of support role rather than my go-to method of attack. While I could absolutely refine my use of it to be precise and only as damaging as I wished, it could be countered far easier than if I relied on various normal spells. The lightning would be my final attack, a trump card, and even then hidden under the guise of normal lightning spells. I didn't even intend to rely on elementalization if I could help it. It wouldn't really work too well against wizards anyway, since the need for intent and will in spells might let them work similarly to Haki and still hit me. I'd need to test this of course to be sure, but I was fairly confident my theory was correct. The mere existence of that spell Madame Pomfrey uses to attack my observation Haki makes it hold weight after all. Once the suddenness of my new ability wore off, the serious expressions and concerns gave way to curiosity and intrigue. I suppose it should have been expected, to be fair, as each of the professors were magical talents who reached their current levels through hard work and curiosity. A new ability like mine would naturally be of great interest to them. They were mostly interested in knowing my new ability's limits and uses in their fields. Flitwick took great delight in how my powers were almost entirely within his field of expertise. There was a small amount of crossover in transfiguration and potions though. Surprisingly, for potions there were actual brews that required the cauldron getting struck by lightning. Potions Snape volunteered me to help him brew without asking for my own input in the matter. Not that I'd say no, since he did say I'd get some of the finished product as a result, but at least being asked first would be nice. The crossover with transfiguration was kinda an accident on my part, as Flitwick tried to test my reflexes to see if they were lightning fast, only for me to instinctively elementalize. I was too damned new to the powers, and it just sort of happened, leaving me mentally cursing since that was exposed now. 55, trump card. The thing about Logia fruits was that elementalization was a built-in safety mechanism for them. Closer to an instinct than anything else really, but entirely controllable. In this particular case I elementalized not because I was in any real danger, but out of surprise at the small chocolate thrown at me. It was annoying to say the least, since I hadn't wanted to expose my elementalization if I could help it. I hadn't had time to train that aspect of my powers literally at all, so there was no controlling it, unfortunately. Incredible. Flitwick squeaked excitedly. Indeed. It must be a protective magic, since physically touching him did not cause anything like that. Dumbledore said with twinkling eyes. Going to be honest here. I'd rather not continue these tests if at all possible. I appreciate the concern for my well-being and even the eagerness to learn more, but I'd like to figure it out on my own. I said seriously. Are you sure? We are all amongst the most skilled practitioners in our fields of magic in the world. Our help in understanding your new abilities could be invaluable. McGonagall asked seriously. And I truly do appreciate the offer. But it's not much of a trump card if it's common knowledge what I can do. Because that's what I see this as, a trump card. A final deciding factor to tip the scales in my favor if I need to. I said honestly. Do you truly believe you will need such a thing? Flitwick asked with a frown, while both Dumbledore and Snape shared in brief look of mutual agreement. It's not a matter of belief but certainty. 11 years ago a madman ran rampant across the country without being stopped. 40 years before that a war that threatened to tear the world apart erupted by another man. Those are only the most recent cases, but all throughout history dangerous elements popped up one after the other. I don't know when exactly the next might show up, but I'd rather be prepared for it than caught flat-footed. I said frankly. That's a grim way to see things. McGonagall said with a conflicted expression between agreement and disapproval. It wasn't hard to understand why either. The thing about history is that objectively people tend to ignore it and its patterns if they can for a better state of mind. Take my previous life for example. How many people chose to ignore the signs that things from the past were repeating themselves? How many realized that history had a general pattern it followed at all for that matter? Not the small details but the larger overarching similarities were striking. This world's history was no different as all throughout it terrible wizards rose to power and fell before eventually another took their place. Even without considering canon I knew that eventually history would repeat itself and someone terrible would rise. Whether or not that person was a threat to me was an entirely different matter. If I'm being honest with my system being what it is at some point I'll have so many different advantages that no wizard in this world could possibly be a threat to me. I am not there yet however so I wasn't lying about why I wanted a trump card. Knowing Voldemort was coming back I definitely wanted to be prepared to deal with him if needed. It is grim yes but history speaks for itself. I said seriously. There is wisdom in the boy's words. Snape said firmly. Dwelling on the darkness of the past shadows the brightness of the future. There is nothing wrong with a healthy dose of caution. Just remember not to let it consume you young Alex. Dumbledore said wisely before convincing the others to leave me be. Once they left I was thoroughly examined by Madame Pomfrey who wanted to absolutely be certain this change in me hadn't caused any problems with my body. I didn't protest as I knew she'd find nothing out of the ordinary, and as I thought she didn't. That didn't stop her from using a variety of diagnostic spells on me that were likely of a more in-depth variety than normal. Finally given a clean bill of health, previous injuries notwithstanding, I was allowed to continue whatever it was I wanted till my next dosing time. I decided to spend my time testing out theories I had about what my new powers could do. First and foremost I closed my eyes and without extending my haki tried to sense my surroundings. Almost immediately I felt a headache bloom into existence as a dense wave of just static filled my mind. It was just a bunch of chaos to me and I couldn't make sense of it. The fact I could even sense it at all was a good sign though as it meant my ideas about how to manipulate the electromagnetic fields all around me should be possible. I opened my eyes while trying to maintain my perception of that static and was stunned at what I saw. That static suddenly had clarity as it overlapped everything in my vision and it was like I was staring at a billion threads attached to and wound around everything waiting to get plucked by me. The spear next to my bed had the strongest of these statics and I twitched my finger while focusing on the static threads of the thing. To my surprise a brief spark popped almost imperceptibly along the thread as the spear twitched in place slightly. I increased my focus and curled my finger while I ignored the pain that caused me. A ripple of energy passed along the spear following that static thread. The spear shakily stood up straight before the pain clouded my thoughts and I had to release the attempt letting it settle back in place. 56. Third customer. I should probably wait till I fully recover. I thought with a sigh. I wasn't going to be too bored for long though as I had the devil fruit deal with Whitebeard coming up as well as my third customer. Hopefully one that would give me access to better products for sale between Rockwell and Whitebeard. Right now those two worlds overlapped too much or clashed too much for any real trades between them. Rockwell's world is one of science and law while Whitebeard's is straight fantasy with its hacky, unreasonable bodies and devil fruits. My current world and Whitebeard's were by comparison much more similar with the magical community being what it was. I was hoping for a world somewhere in the middle if possible or at least different enough from all three of our worlds to have value to us all. For now though I chose to keep my nose in my book since I had played the role of a prodigy well so far and I'd like to keep that image up. It was easier to accept unusual things when it came from a prodigy after all. If I cement the image of being different than everyone else in the minds of everyone nobody would freak out when I introduced things from other worlds. Well that's not strictly true as obviously there would be a commotion about the things but that would be more of an issue with what they mean than their strangeness. Devil fruits for example would definitely cause a commotion due to their powers. It would be attributed to magical abilities though because that was apparently exactly what they were. That brought up an interesting theory that one Dr. Vegapunk had about the fruits in the One Piece world. He believed that the fruits were manifestations of one or more people's hopes for human evolution. If we assume that that world has magic like this world but no wizards, and if we take the fact that magic responses to intent and emotion from this world and combine them together I believe it might cause that world to spawn a devil fruit if the belief was great enough. Maybe this was stretching things a bit on my part but it would fill in the missing pieces of the puzzle about them. The reason the fruits affect the lineage factors of the people who eat them is because magic is hereditary but the fruit's magic is incomplete so traces remain but don't fully manifest. By this theory of mine if enough devil fruit users were to intermarry and breed then eventually the chances of a true wizard being born become possible. To achieve such a thing though would require multiple generations of devil fruit users living in a community without any non-fruit users being present. To say that was not likely would be a massive understatement, next to impossible is better. I could very easily be wrong though as it was simply too hard to thoroughly research things like this. If I wasn't wrong though it brought up another theory. A wizard eating a devil fruit might pass on traits from that fruit to their children since they already had a complete magical gene. If devil fruits added to the lineage factor to add up to a full magical gene eventually then adding more would in theory give the extra to the offspring. It was an interesting theory if nothing else, and one I'd have to try and verify in the future with some of the children of those who receive devil fruits from me. For now though, I chose to focus on my magical studies until it was time to see who the lucky person was that got chosen for my third customer. Time came for me to get dosed again, and once I woke up I went back to studying. I finished the book set out for me by my professors in another 2 days, and it was also ironically the same day I got access to the search function again. I waited till I was alone in the hospital wing before activating the search function. Search function activated. Searching. 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 Target locked. Initiating trade window with target David Martinez, world, Cyberpunk. This was an unexpected and frankly conflicting selection to me. The conflict was because I knew how extremely valuable the technology from that world was, but at the same time I was a wizard. Magic and electricity-based technology didn't mix, at all. I wasn't sure why this was, but popular theory in my previous life was that magic operated at a frequency that caused electricity in tech to fry said tech. Whatever the case, the technology of this world was not something I could personally use, which sucked. That familiar graying out of the world showed up as the white screen filled my vision before the image changed to show a young Hispanic boy with hair cut short on the sides and left wild up top. He had brown eyes and an expression of confusion. He seemed to be sitting on a couch with a bright yellow puffy jacket with silver stripes on it. "Yo, did you blitz my optics, chum?" he asked as he looked around and even tried to call someone as his eyes genuinely lit up with a light where his pupils are. "Not as such actually. Are you familiar with multiverse theory by chance?" I asked, knowing I'd need to explain some stuff before he understood this wasn't someone messing with him. "Not really, why?" he asked, confused. "So multiverse theory is that every thought, choice, action and event that could ever have been exists as a separate universe. Like a copy of the original but different based on what was different. Following me so far?" I asked and he nodded. "Okay, so what I can do is open a sort of window from one universe to another at random, and through that trade things. Knowledge, skills, abilities, tech, items and much more. You, lucky fellow that you are, were selected as my customer in your universe. While you are here speaking to me, time is frozen for both our worlds except for us. Now that we have that out of the way, introductions are in order. I am Alexander Drake, multiversal merchant," I said grandly with a smile. "Cool story, chum. Seriously though, when'd you blitz my optics?" he asked, clearly disbelieving me. "A demonstration then, to prove my words?" I said, not surprised, as I sent one of my stored Wiggeneld potions over to him. "Holy shit. You mean you aren't yanking my chain?" he exclaimed in shock when the vial of green liquid manifested in his hand out of thin air. 57. Changing a fate. I chuckled at his reaction. There was an innocence to it that felt out of place for the world he lived in. This was how I could tell it must have been pretty early in the timeline for him. Perhaps this was even before he joined Maine's crew and lost that innocence. "No mate, I'm not yanking you around. This is really happening," I said reassuringly. "Why me? Why now?" he asked after he seemed to remember something and his expression fell. I sighed honestly. "Luck. The way this whole cross-universe connection thing works is highly based on luck. I could connect to someone moments from death, or even an infant in theory. The exact moment I make contact with someone and who is entirely out of my hands. Like I said, you lucked out," I said, giving it to him straight. "You must be from a different universe than mine then. What's it like over there?" he asked curiously after accepting my answer. "The history of my world is roughly the same as yours, with two major differences. The first is magic is and always has been real here. I myself am a wizard in training, and that vial I sent you is a potion called Wiggeneld that heals small injuries like cuts or bruises in almost no time at all. It could even save your life if you were damaged severely, as it lessened the damage somewhat. It's not some miracle cure-all though, so don't go treating it like one. The second major difference is what happened after World War II." I said seriously. "Wait, seriously? You're a wizard?" he exclaimed in shock. I held up a hand and let a few arcs of electricity pass over it. "That's so damn nova," he said excitedly. "It can be. It's also highly dangerous and needs to be respected as such. I failed to do that, and these injuries are the price I paid for my hubris," I said honestly. "Can't you just like magic them away or something?" he asked confused. I shook my head. "Magic is like a science with rules and limits. My injuries were caused by powerful magic, so they need to heal naturally and can't be fixed with a simple potion or spell. There's probably a way to heal me up with magic in no time, but we simply don't know it if there is. It's that simple," I said helplessly. "Just swap out to Chrome then, no big deal," he said simply, and I shook my head again. "That's not possible for me for two reasons. First is that magic doesn't play well with electrical-based tech, which is to say any and all cyberware. The second is we don't have any of that here. That was the major difference in our histories. After World War II, things stabilized for us instead of failed like it did for your world. Corporations didn't rise up and technological progress only grew within the lines of ethical oversight. We never got cyberware due to the unethical way it was developed in your world. Don't get me wrong, my world is no paradise, but your world is a nightmare to live in for the average person," I said seriously. "Don't I know it? If you aren't a corpo you get stepped on and treated worse than dirt," he said bitterly. Anyways, I am a merchant of different universes, so your fate will be different than anyone else in your world from now on. Before that, however, I need to know where in your life you are currently. I can tell from a few context clues that it is after your mother passed, but that's it. I said seriously. He scratched his head at this. I mean, there's not much more than that. I got kicked out of the academy for fucking up the school's BD server and chipped in this crazy Sandevistan I found in my mom's jacket. Met this chick on the rail though, Lucy, she's preem man. Turns out Doc fucked me over by not giving me immune suppressants, but that's it. I'm at Lucy's place by the way. He said, and I sighed. Gonna be honestly with you mate, you are kinda boned. Not in a good way either. If you are already at her place, that means the owner of that Sandevistan in your back is already on his way. Guy's an edge runner boss by name of Maine, and he's an afterlife regular if you even know what that means. You know that fat paycheck you found in your mom's account some time ago? That was payment for the chrome you chipped in. I said with a slight headache. Ideally I would have gotten in contact with him before he installed the Sandevistan, as then he could have been kept out of Maine's crew by simply handing the thing over. That option was long gone now. He was literally in the house of the girl who was fully intent on handing him over to Maine, knowing he'd likely die as a result. Even worse, there was no way David could fight the girl and win. She was not only highly trained but incredibly quick to react. The moment this contact ended, she'd noticed the shift in David and likely immediately moved to kill or capture him. How do you know that? David asked in surprise. My business is literally trading across universes, so I am at least decently familiar with any individual of note within quite a lot of the multiverse. I know your entire life story from the time your mom died to when you die roughly. This moment right here was a very important one for you. I had hoped I caught you before now, but not all things go to plan. I said honestly. Shit. So what do I do? He asked, realizing the bad situation he was in. Not many options here mate. Not trying to insult you, but you are so far out of your league it's not even funny. That girl is not just some picksocket you ran into who isn't dangerous. She's a highly trained fighter and net runner. She's got nanowire in her arms that would turn you into little chunks of meat faster than you can blink if she thought she needed to. Your Sandevistan won't help here. I said, pausing to make sure he was following along. Your only option is to show your hands and tell her you'll wait to talk with Maine. No choice mate, your poker face is terrible and she'll notice the moment this contact ends. When Maine arrives, be honest with him, tell him who your mom is and what happened to her. Offer to pay back what he paid and more. Tell him to chip you if he doesn't believe you. Play for time, at least a day. If you can get at least that, I can pass you some gold that can get you out of this mess. I said seriously. 58, changing a fate, too. What if he zeroes me anyway? David asked, panicked. He shouldn't. Maine can be a hard ass and ruthless sure, but once he knows who you are and why you chipped in the Sandevistan, he'll at least not kill you if you give him an alternative. I said seriously. What if he presses for the Sandy still? He asked, a little more calm but still not in a great headspace. If you absolutely have to hand over the Sandevistan, ask him to at least wait for you to find something to put in its place. In case you aren't aware, that bit of tech has entirely replaced your spine. Without a replacement you die, plain and simple. It'd be best if you kept the Sandevistan though, so if he'll accept repayment at a high interest, take it. Any problem money can solve I can cover easy, just whatever you do don't try and join his crew. The man's on the fast track to cyberpsychosis and you'll get burned hard. I said seriously. Fuck chum, this all sounds like a mess. He said, scratching his head in frustration. This contact has no time limit, so take some time to steady your nerves before repeating what you should do back to me. I said, trying to reassure him. So you must be like super rich to be able to get gold so easy, right? He asked, trying to make small talk to calm down. Not really. Most of my money is in Gringotts, the wizard bank. I definitely don't have enough on hand to get you out of this mess. Luckily for you, I happen to have another customer who can get bars of gold as easy as turning over his hand and will have no trouble at all helping me bail you out. I said honestly. Damn chum, sounds like one of those real high roller types. He said, impressed. I chuckled. He's actually one of the most down-to-earth people I've ever met. Monstrously powerful but chill most the time. I said with a smile. For real? I always thought folk like that were all stuck up and stuff. He said, surprised. Stereotypes can be useful when you don't know anything about someone, but it's best to learn for yourself. In the end they are all just people, some are fine and others, well you get that picture already. I said with a shrug. Some are like Katsuo, yeah. He said, nodding in agreement. I considered telling him that the guy he mentioned was only like that because of his home life, but chose not to in the end. It didn't matter in the end, their lives weren't likely to cross in the future anyways. I think I'm ready. Still nervous though. He admitted. That's totally understandable. Now tell me what your plan is, just to make sure it's solid. I said seriously. Gotta try to keep my cool and play for time. Time to get something to replace my spine or scratch up the repayment, right? He asked, to make sure. That's the end goal, yeah. Like I said though, no matter what, do not join his crew. I said with a nod. Got it. So how does this whole thing work? He asked, motioning to the screen. I'll end the contact now and get into contact with my other customer. See you on the other side mate. I said before cutting the contact and hoping against hope everything went well enough. The moment the world returned to normal I didn't hesitate to spend another 50 coins to open up a contact with Whitebeard. The world grayed out once again and that familiar screen appeared and soon showed me Whitebeard sitting leisurely as he does most days. "Gurrera. I was just talking about you, brat," he said with a wide grin. "Only good things I hope," I said amused. "Just settling the last-minute stuff before our trade is all," he said casually. "That works out for me then. I need you to throw in a bit of gold with it. My newest customer is up a creek without a paddle and needs some liquid funds to save himself. Most of my stuff is in the bank and I'm laid up in bed so I can't get the gold I'd need to fix his problem myself," I explained seriously. "Sounds like an interesting story. Just take the gold, I have plenty. Now for this batch of fruits, one hasn't been eaten but we can't find it in any encyclopedia. We've been able to roughly tell it's probably a paramecia but that's it," he said casually. "Trading partner Edward Newgate wishes to give the user items, 5x gold bars accept items Y/N. I accepted the gold without skipping a beat and moved on to the topic he brought up. An unknown fruit. Could be anything really. I don't blame you for wanting it checked out first," I said honestly. "Gurrera. There's no weak fruits but some of them are pretty weird," he said with a laugh. "Yeah, I'd definitely not want to get stuck with something like the jacket fruit. Can you imagine having other people wearing you like a coat being your power? Might as well not even have one at that point," I said with a slight shudder at the idea. Thankfully we have you to check for us," he agreed. "So what fruits did you snatch up the users for this time anyways?" I asked curiously. "Swamp logia, rust paramecia, blade paramecia, salt logia and black mamba zoan," he said casually. 59, author note, not a chapter. Man, it's been a while since I made something like this. I kinda felt like I needed to though, as after reading literally every comment and review I've found that a lot of people seem to misunderstand several things about this story. I'm not angry or anything but the comments and especially the negative reviews built off these misunderstands sting quite a bit, so I'm here to clarify things. First and foremost is the actions and behavior of the MC. Like I get he's been kinda stupid at some points and even seemingly illogical at others, but there is a reason for that. To start with, let's talk about his background during his previous life. He worked at Walmart and wasn't someone who had years of sales experience and a multi-billion-dollar empire. This is why he's struggling so much with actually being a merchant. He's inexperienced and frankly ignorant how to do it like a pro. He's winging it basically and it shows. Second is many people have probably paid it no attention, but he died. And not in a way where it came so suddenly that he barely even knew it happened. He went out slowly and incredibly painfully. That sticks to you. In his own way he's still coping with that, and it's making his way of thinking off or downright inconsiderate of the consequences of his actions past himself. He's a damaged soul with a fresh new chance and an overwhelming amount of expectation and power from the get-go. He'll need time to mellow out. Finally, we have the system and all its functions. Frankly, a lot of you are taking these functions way out of hand. For example, I keep getting questions why he doesn't just take the good part of a devil fruit and leave the curse out of it. The answer is because the curse is innate to devil fruits. No curse, no powers. That world is just balanced like that. Another example of a trade that makes no sense is someone wondered why he couldn't send away his injuries. Injuries aren't things that can be traded away, they are a part of the body. The things he can trade for, such as skills, abilities and even potentially souls, are all clearly defined things. Skills are just knowledge, abilities are extra stuff people could have. This is why he could get hacky and even the One Piece physique, not Whitebeard's physique but the physique that makes it possible for literally everyone in that world to grow so powerful. For skills, I even made it clear that they would be differing depending on the source. For example, his hacky skill was a direct copy of Whitebeard's own knowledge on how to use hacky. If the skill were from say Enel, however, it would only cover his understanding of observation since that's all he knows. Abilities are similar if there is an innate difference in each owner of an ability. Conqueror's hacky, for example, is found only in a select few, so naturally the version of the hacky ability he'd get from people may or may not contain it based on its source. Next up is the shop that was less misunderstood but still had some trouble. As it was explained at the start, the shop has items from his world and only his. That means Harry Potter exclusive items and that's it. Does this make it harder for him? Yes, it does. But it was also intentional since I wanted him to have a legitimate reason to trade across the multiverse rather than connecting to a world and just having its entire selection of stuff available to him. Finally is everyone who was saying the story was a power fantasy. Yes, you are all correct, this is a power fantasy. But it's not the sort where everything is sunshine and rainbows all the time. His injuries were proof of this. He started to get cocky and paid for it, plain and simple. Now to the special mentions. Will he ever get a world to trade with? He doesn't know. Yes he will, but I won't spoil it. Will he ever travel to other worlds? Also yes, but only temporarily and only with very specific conditions that will be explained as it comes up. What about romance or lemons? To put it bluntly, I don't like writing romance. This is clear in literally all of my other stories up to now and it's not changing. For this particular story I don't think the very idea of romance is a good one. Could it maybe work out? Yes, but it doesn't fit. It's not something he would actively encourage as a character and would probably play dense to avoid if anything. I know some of you love seeing romance, maybe it's even a mandatory thing for you, but this story probably won't have it and I'm not sorry about it. For everyone who has read this far, congratulations, have a cookie. Sincerely Losgro. 60, Changing a Fate, 3. Oh, I'm familiar with the first 3's users but the last 2 are new to me. I said honestly. Just some small-time pirates from the South Blue that got to the Grand Line and stagnated. Whitebeard said dismissively. Makes sense, shame though. A salt logia sounds like it would be incredibly useful, especially if you know how to purify salt into sodium metal. I said seriously. That's what Marco said too. The Zoan fruit was also his idea. He said with a shrug. It's a powerful fruit if used right despite being merely a normal Zoan type. Black Mamba's venom can kill with very little. I said nodding. Alright, I'll have the last of it all settled by tomorrow. You take care of that other fellow in the meanwhile. Whitebeard said finally, and I nodded before ending the contact. 5 bars of gold should be worth a fair bit in that world, though he'll need to launder it first. He lives in Arroyo, so that means he's in Muammer Reyes' authority as the district fixer. Reyes shouldn't cause him any trouble with fencing the gold given his side hustle with boosting and reselling cars. I thought working through the steps of this plan in my head. I didn't immediately contact David again, as the discussion with Maine would likely take some time, assuming he wasn't on his way to be butchered for the Sandevistan because negotiations failed. There was no point in stressing over it, I suppose, so I chose to focus my attention on finishing up these books since I'd be getting quizzed on them soon. I only had 1.5 left anyways, so I wasn't too worried so long as the order that I got quizzed didn't change from the last week's. I managed to finish the half book I had left of McGonagall's tome before it was time for my dosage. Your injuries are recovering well. You should be able to return to normal life within 2 days so long as a pain-relieving potion is available to you in regular dosages. The pain itself should be gone by the end of the month if your healing speed holds. Madame Pomfrey says as she changed my bandages. That's a relief. Not that I can say I mind being unconscious most of the day, but being confined to a bed for so long is not exactly my idea of a good time. I said jokingly. As well it shouldn't. Perhaps you'll remember that if you ever consider a dangerous action again. She said before finally dosing me. When I came to again the next day, I checked my surroundings with Hacky and finding myself alone initiated contact with David again. When the screen eventually showed him to me, I couldn't help but sigh. Looks like he roughed you up anyways. What happened? I asked seriously. After you hung up I got wrapped up in nanowire immediately. You weren't kidding about how fast she was. I did what you said and played along. You never mentioned Maine looked like a damned animal. Or that he wasn't alone for that matter. He said with a scowl. Pilar and Dorio weren't all that important here, only Maine was. His say was final after all. I said, shrugging off the accusation. Whatever, chum. He got me all rough and stuff at first until I could finally tell him who I was and what happened to my mom. After that we got to really talking about the Sandy. He still wants it but says he'll let it go if I can pay triple what he did for it. 150k eddies. I've got 3 days and a tracking chip so I don't run. He already took back the money he sent my mom. He said with a defeated look. Are you in a safe spot? I asked seriously. I'm at home if that counts. He said grimly. Good enough. I said, sending over the gold bars. It took him a moment for his brain to move on from being frozen in shock at the gold that had quite literally fallen onto his lap. Is this real? He asked shakily. They are. I am not sure what the rate for gold is in your world, but I imagine this much should be enough to pay off that triple price Maine wanted with plenty extra. I said calmly. This has to be worth at least 1 million eddies, right? He asked out loud with a lost expression. Don't get excited yet, you will be losing a good chunk of that money to fence it. I said sternly. What do you mean? He asked with a frown. Let me break this down. Gold is a tightly controlled resource and is definitely watched closely in your world. A few bits of jewelry or watches or whatever else you might be able to get away with taking to a pawn shop or even a jeweler, as the gold content is not that great, nobody really cares. Those bars though, each of those is 12.4 kilograms, 62 pounds of 98.7% pure gold. You'd need to sell that amount straight to a bank or a gold vendor, and the moment you do you'll get flagged for suspicious activity, and I am willing to bet they won't ask nicely where you got it if they even ask at all for that matter. You need to fence it through someone else at a loss, a professional. I explained seriously. I don't know anyone like that. He explained in horror as he understood. I've already thought of this problem and a solution to it as well. You live in Arroyo, which is part of Santo Domingo. There should be a fixer by the name of Muammer Reyes there. He can be trusted not to burn you, but it'll cost you a hefty chunk of this gold's worth. Start the haggle at 85-15 split, and as he tries to drive up his own profit here, make sure yours doesn't get lower than 70-30 with the lion's share going your way. I said seriously. Damn chum, you sure there's no way I can't keep more of it? He asked a little unwilling. Not unless you are good friends with the sort of people that would toss around wealth like that casually. Those people wouldn't get flagged for doing it and you keep it all. If you had friends like that though, you wouldn't need this gold anyways. I said, rolling my eyes. What should I even say to this Reyes chum anyways? He asked, dropping that hope. Just tell him you've got a rich backer who wants some gold turned to Eurodollars untraceably and in a hurry through you in a profitable deal for everyone involved. If he asks for more details, just be honest and tell him you don't know anything about me who gave you the gold, which is true. You can give him my name if you want to sell it, but he'll quickly figure out it's an alias since I don't exist in that world. Should be fairly smooth after that. I said honestly. 61, Cyberpunk and beyond. What about after that? He asked curiously. Focus on one thing at a time, mate. Just get this fencing with Reyes done with and pay off Maine first. After that, find a new place to live in a safer location. Doesn't need to be North Oaks or anything like that, but anywhere that you don't have to worry about some random gang members or thieves busting in will work. Hole up there till I contact you again. It'll be 4 days from now at most. Got it? I said, and he nodded. Settle things with Maine and find new digs to lie low. Got it, chum? He said seriously. I ended the contact there since there was nothing left to say and could only hope everything went well. Even with Maine tracking him through that chip in his head, this plan wouldn't have any issues so long as he stayed in the city until the guy was paid off. Despite this, I couldn't help but want to curse the large black man for setting such an unreasonably high price on the Sandevistan. Even in the game, the iconic top-tier apogee Sandevistan went for only €100,000. If you count the payment he made to David's mom that he took back in addition to the $150,000 extra David is still going to pay him, that's twice the price from the game for a piece of tech he couldn't even use. The special Sandevistan David had might perform at a much higher level than even the one from the game since it's an experimental model, but it also put a massive amount of strain on the nervous system and body. A strain that would likely immediately drive Maine mad when he is already skirting the edge of cyberpsychosis. The only reason David could handle it so easily was that he had a ridiculously high affinity for cyberware, on par with even the game's protagonist or Atom Smasher. Not that I intended to tell him that. Replacing a few parts with better performing cyberware was fine, but aiming intentionally for almost full body augmentation was unacceptable. Cyberware was static in nature and required maintenance regularly, making it unsuited for growth. David was one of my customers now, and that meant tying his growth to his world's technological improvement, and what he could even access without joining a corporation was foolish. I highly doubted that I wouldn't gain access to other worlds with high technology in the future, and even the technology in his world had serious flaws due to a lack of care for safety or ethics when it was made and distributed. At this moment, what I wanted more than anything from his world was its raw knowledge. That world's cyberization and technological advancement was directly tied to the utter disregard for moral or ethical limits when experimenting, and a willingness by those in power to throw as many bodies as needed into the grinder to progress even a little. This meant its knowledge was ruthlessly accurate and broad-reaching. Medicine, engineering, genetics, all much more advanced than most worlds. That knowledge was incredibly valuable in my own world, but in a great deal of others too. Of course, you couldn't pay me enough to bring it into my own world. I wasn't so foolish as to empower the muggles like that when I was unable to benefit from it myself. Money was cheap, I could easily get more, and power was only a matter of time. Time I would definitely not get if I just released the cyberpunk world's collective knowledge into the world. In summary, this knowledge was exclusively for resale in other worlds. With David's matter all but settled, I relaxed and worked to finish up the final book that the professors had for me. In this case, the potions book Snape had picked out. It was not just recipes like one might expect, but rather a book talking about the more metaphysical aspects of potion making. It was interesting to me how even a seemingly simple craft like potion making had true depth to it. It wasn't just learning and following recipes. Sure, you could do exactly that to be considered a decent potion maker, but that wasn't the path to mastery, merely mimicry. The reason true potion masters were so rare and valued is because they not only knew a vast array of recipes, but they understood the principles that made the potions work to begin with. It was a nuanced and precise art that took more than talent, it took dedication and study. This book covered but a fraction of that nuance and proved Snape's devotion to properly teaching the subject. Ever the studious one, I see, Alex. Flitwick said with an approving smile as he propped himself up next to my bed. Not much else to do at the moment. It helps that most of the information tends to be genuinely interesting if rather dry. I said as I plucked a single one of my hairs to use as a bookmark. Do you normally save your place like that? He asked, concerned. I shook my head no. Normally I finish the page I am on and then memorize the number so I can flip straight to it when next I pick it up, but you caught me mid-paragraph, so a slight deviation is needed. I said honestly. I understand. I suggest investing in a bookmark. Things willingly given from a wizard's body can have many unsavory uses, and it's best to limit that as much as possible. Blood in particular must never be given without extreme need. Flitwick warned seriously. Thank you for the warning, I will take it to heart. Now then, shall we begin? I said with a respectful nod. 62. Quizzes and fruit trade. Start by explaining what each wand movement is used for. Flitwick said calmly. From what I can understand, the wand movements are more about what the purpose of the spell is to be used for. Take the levitation charm for example. The standard movement is a swish and flick, which is used for a short gathering of magic before a smooth steady release of it in the manner the words dictated. Correct me if I'm wrong, but couldn't you use a different movement such as a stab to change the nature of the spell? In my given example, it should in theory cause the target to rapidly shoot upwards but not stay airborne after its ascension was complete. I said seriously. He clapped with a pleased smile. Wonderful deduction and understanding. 15 points to Ravenclaw. Indeed, the wand movements one uses for a spell are more integral to the magic's usage than merely another step in it. Changing the movement changes the spell's effect as you've theorized. He said happily. I had wondered why spells required both verbal and movement components until I read that book. It was enlightening to say the least. Perhaps I may even have taken a solid step toward spell creation by understanding this knowledge. I said, quite happy with the confirmation my theory was right. He chortled but shook his head gently. Not exactly. If you were attempting to standardize a new spell, then this would be true, but in most cases I am familiar with spell creation begins with the effect and only then on making it replicable for the masses. This is why most who create new spells do so using arithmancy to deduce the effect structure before finding the right verbal and movement-based components. That is advanced knowledge, however, and you aren't yet ready for it. He explained patiently. I see. I am glad you explained that before I made a mess by overreaching. I said, genuinely grateful. This sort of professional knowledge is exactly what I needed, as neither the books or the movies covered it. If you were to try and figure it out on your own, things would likely turn nasty unless you were ridiculously lucky. Think nothing of it. As your professor, it is my job to educate you in the art of spells after all. He said sincerely. After that I presented the rest of the mentioned wand movements and what they were meant for, along with examples of how they might affect spells. Flitwick was thoroughly pleased and awarded another 10 points before leaving me happily humming as he did so. Professor Sprout came next as per the schedule, and once again we went through the plants and seeds she brought for identification, growing habits, and even when they should be harvested for peak potency. I earned another 5 points for doing a good job before it was time for me to be dosed again. When I woke up again, I barely got even a moment to check my surroundings before the world grayed out and the screen popped up and Whitebeard appeared. Everything is ready, right? I asked and he nodded. Sending over the stuff now. He said seriously as he focused. Trading partner, Edward Newgate wishes to give the user items, treasure, devil fruit, supa supa no mi, treasure, devil fruit, hebai hebai no mi model black mamba, treasure, devil fruit, numa numa no mi, treasure, devil fruit, shio shio no mi, treasure, devil fruit, haiku haiku no mi, ability stone, haki x5, ability stone, one piece physique x5 accept items y/n. There's that fruit. Whitebeard said they couldn't identify. I thought as I accepted the trade. I took out the fruit in question immediately and appraised it. Item name, haiku haiku no mi. Class, treasure. Value, 100,000 system coins. Condition, perfect. Description, the pull fruit of the One Piece world. This fruit turns the one who eats it into a pulling human, allowing them to create and control attraction forces. Eating this fruit brings the sea devil sealed within it into one's body and thus renders the eater unable to swim or use their powers when submerged in sea water or when in contact with sea prism stone. This fruit is the haiku haiku no mi or pull fruit. It lets the person who eats it create and control attractive forces. It has pretty good potential, I have to admit. I said as I sent all the fruits back to Whitebeard. Gururera. Not bad at all. He said with a wide grin as he sets the fruits to the side. Thanks for the other stuff, by the way. Those will be a solid staple for me to sell in most worlds that still rely on the body. Oh, and if you could find me a plant-based devil fruit, I'd appreciate it. I said with my own grin. A plant-based fruit? What do you need that for? He asked curiously. There's a potential deal with someone in this world so long as I can get such a thing. I said I'd ask about it, and I do try to keep my word if I can. It's not a rush job this time though, so you can take your time. I said with a shrug. Alright, I'll keep an ear out on anything like that. I'll need another week or so to get the next batch of fruits ready, so you rest up till then, brat. He said with a grin before hanging up. The world returned to normal and my next professor showed up, Bins. The ghost was boring to talk to, but I managed to get through his questions about the book he chose. After that was Quirrell, who seemed to forget to stutter as he grilled me on the tome he had chosen for me. Judging from the coldness of his eyes and arrogant expression, I was pretty sure this was actually just Voldemort possessing the body fully on a temporary basis. It was pretty heavily implied he wasn't just a passenger in the books and movies, so this wasn't terribly surprisingly, though I perfectly acted as though it was. 63. Dangerous game. Quirrell didn't bother explaining the lack of stuttering despite my feigned shock, but grilled me harshly on the knowledge I took from the book chosen for me. Excellent. Your talent is clear to see. I believe you are ready for more advanced topics. He said at the end, once seemingly satisfied with my performance. What kind of advanced topics? I asked with a suspicion. Curses and hexes, of course. While I cannot be sure of your true ability with spell casting given your current circumstances, it's quite obvious it cannot be low. He said casually. It took serious effort on my part not to react to that negatively. The books made it quite clear that dark magic corrupts the caster both in body and soul. I was pretty sure that the curses and hexes he was mentioning weren't the sort that could be considered pranks and thus harmless overall. Or perhaps they were, and he was going to slowly lead me to the dark side with promises of power and glory. Ignoring the instability in his mind and soul from splitting his soul so many times, Voldemort was a certified genius and manipulator. It would not be terribly surprising if he understood that a child like me wouldn't be comfortable jumping straight into dark magic that caused harm to others and was going to slowly ease me to it. Curses and hexes? That sounds incredibly dangerous, sir. I exclaimed in mock shock and caution while eyeing my spear. Calm yourself. He said harshly. I'm not asking you to learn the 3 unforgivable curses. These will be little more than things used for pranks or warnings. He said, switching to a reassuring tone. I don't know, sir. What about the other professors? I asked with mock concern. I will explain it to the others, not to worry. He said reassuringly, and if I didn't know better I might have believed him. There's the manipulative bastard that created the Death Eaters with power and honeyed words before revealing his true intentions. I thought but kept my act up. I suppose you would know best as the professor. I said, feigning cautious acceptance. He seemed to accept that easily and left afterwards, and I had to take a deep breath to steady myself. I didn't know if he saw through my act or not, but it was necessary. If he thought he was successfully tricking me into a darker path, he'd pay less attention to me and more to the classmate of mine who once caused his death, Harry Potter. Ironically, it was a trick I learned from dealing with Karens in my previous life. Those people who tried to make things difficult for some sense of control or just all-around self-importance. You played along and made them think they were winning, and it was amazing how easy it was to get them to leave you alone. In this case, Voldemort himself probably couldn't even imagine a case where he was the one getting strung along. He was too arrogant to, after all. The movies and books had multiple examples of this problem of his showing up. This whole damn year was the biggest of them all. The guy seriously thought Dumbledore didn't know he was here on Quirrell's head? Ridiculous. Or perhaps the time when he freed Harry to force him to duel him as a show of power to the Death Eaters, which gave Harry the chance to escape. There were plenty of others as well where his arrogance caught him flat-footed. After that it was McGonagall and then Snape for my quizzes to round out my full list for the week. McGonagall was easy to please as I simply recited the book she gave me and added my own thoughts on it that she either confirmed or denied. Snape, however, was as expected an absolute taskmaster, but seemed almost excited when I began asking about the aspects of potions that the book he chose didn't cover. I wasn't deluding myself into thinking he liked me or anything like that, but it was pretty clear he at least seemed to appreciate my own passion for the potioneering art. How could I be not when potions were a massive mountain of profit waiting to be claimed? The sheer breadth and depth that potions covered means so long as I mastered the art I'd have a potion to sell across the multiverse that was valuable to everyone. Barren wasteland, nutrition potion, battlefield, healing potion, assassination, pick a poisonous potion. I would be a fool not to treat potioneering with as much reverence as I could with a system like mine. I didn't earn any points from the man for good performance, but he did leave a vial of pain-relieving potion when he left. It wasn't like pain-relieving medications that dulled your sense of pain, but one that actually caused the pain to go away temporarily. It did have a side effect of also making your sense of touch a bit duller than normal, but given my condition I was perfectly okay with that. Like Madame Pomfrey had said, I was almost recovered enough to return to normal life, but I would need regular doses of pain-relieving potion. My hands still hurt a lot to move, but it wasn't so much that it was crippling anymore. I could go without the bandages now as my skin had closed up, but I had no intention of taking the bandages off. The first reason for this was that I actually found them aesthetically appealing. The second was because my hands were gnarly to look at the moment. The skin was rough and dark with clear lightning patterned lines across its surface with angry redness. I wasn't vain or anything, but it was easier to keep my hands wrapped up than to have to deal with people constantly focus in on my hands. That said, I was definitely going to improve the bandages themselves. Perhaps a white silk with gold threading instead. If I get the bandages enchanted as well, I might even be able to use them defensively or offensively. I'd have to sneak out to Hogsmeade during one of the weekends to find a clothing store to commission such a set of bandages, but it'd be worth it in my opinion. I already knew how to wrap my hands up thanks to watching Madame Pomfrey do it over and over again, so I'd only need a bit of practice or magic. 64 Types of Spells. My new batch of books arrived when I next awoke, and I immediately got busy with the Charms book. This one was on little-known spells that, while useful to a degree, weren't covered in the course of the subject this year or any other. This was also where I first was exposed to the rare field of illusion magic. This magic was unfortunately one that was underutilized and more often than not left forgotten. To clarify, magic fell into different categorizations beyond the well-known ones like charms, hexes, curses and so on. The fields are control, destruction, alteration, illusion, mysticism and restoration. Control spells do exactly as stated in that they forcefully exert control over the target. Wingardium Leviosa and Torrent Legra fall into this category. Destruction spells are the sort that create dangerous forces such as Igneo, Glacis and Diffindo. Alteration spells are not to be confused with transfiguration, as it alters a property of the target permanently. The sour hex is one such example, as it makes whatever it's used on incredibly sour. Illusion spells are one specifically meant to trick the senses and include such spells as Mufflieto, Disillusionment Charm and Muggle Repellent Charms. Mysticism is spells that rely on foreign elements such as the Fiendfire spell. Restoration spells are the sort that fix things like Reparo or Episky. Most healing spells fall into this category. Anyways, besides one or two well-known spells like the ones I mentioned, the illusion field of magic tended to be ignored. This was a shame in my opinion, as truly controlling all five senses of someone was an incredibly broken ability. Take Sosuke Aizen from the Bleach anime. Using his sword's ability to do precisely that, he had the most powerful people in the world thinking he was dead. They even performed an autopsy on his corpse and couldn't tell the difference between the illusion and reality. With his sword's ability he was nearly untouchable so long as he wasn't caught in an area of effect type attack. That was the potential illusions held, and yet to nearly everyone the field was considered little more than petty tricks. So you could imagine my great joy at finding a spell of this type in this new book. Transa Adderpart was an illusion spell that made the user appear to anyone looking to be standing in a location almost exactly 6 inches to the left or right of their true location. This doesn't sound very impressive until you understand that 6 inches could mean the difference between getting a bullet to the brain and the bullet harmlessly missing. In a magical duel it meant actually hitting the caster required first knowing precisely where they are standing. If you aim for center mass as most wizards do, then you'll at best only hit the sides of the target or miss entirely, and that's without the person moving to dodge. There was a slight catch with the spell that made it a bit hard to train: the caster wasn't affected. This meant you'd need a mirror of some decent size to tell whether or not it worked, as your reflection would be what the illusion showed, but you'd still know where you are. Still, the ROR was a thing, so I'd sooner or later master this spell, as it would be an extra layer of security for me. The book had plenty of other situational at best type spells that I greedily memorized. To my surprise, my speed reading skill rose to level 2 right as I finished the book, and testing it with the Herbology book found that my reading speed had flat doubled from what it was before. Thanks to this I managed to complete the book before my next dosing. The next day when I woke up I managed to complete the Transfiguration, History of Magic and Potion books before being dosed again. This change was a welcome one for me, as the more books I could read in the shortest amount of time, the more knowledge I would eventually have at my fingertips from the massive library here at Hogwarts. I checked on the 3rd day to see if I was alone before contacting David to see how that whole situation was going. The world grayed out and the screen appeared before showing me David in the middle of eating a burger, not a good looking one at that. I didn't know what it was made of exactly, but it wasn't meat and vegetables, that's for sure. He paused mid-bite with a surprised expression before deciding to go through with it in the end. "Catch you at a bad time?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. He swallowed the mouthful of "not burger, not chum. After I paid off Maine, these last couple of days have been preem as hell," he said with a grin. "I imagine. How much did you end up getting for all that gold in the end?" I asked curiously. "A bit over $1 million EDS, Fixer took 300k though," he said with a grimace. 550,000 still isn't bad as a final payday. Not nearly enough to live in the lap of luxury, but good enough for my plan," I said with a nod. "Gonna fill in the blanks here or nah? What's the plan, chum?" he asked, leaning forward. "First things first, you need to go see a ripperdoc, man by the name of Victor Vector, set up in Watson behind an esoterica shop. I know it's ironic coming from a wizard like me, but that shop's not important right now, the Ripper is. I'm not joking when I say he's the best public ripperdoc in Night City that isn't a corporation asset. Went to medical school and everything. Anyways, get an appointment with him to check if your Sandevistan is put on right or needs adjustment. Beyond that, you want a top-of-the-line Neuroport and Kiroshi MK5 Oracle optics. If he doesn't have the optics, see about as high grade of the Stalker series as you can get." I say seriously. 65, discharged. That sounds hella pricey, chum. You sure? David asked with a conflicted look. The Neuroport shouldn't be too much, a few thousand at most. But the optics are gonna be about 70 or so thousand. It's important that you have ports and optics that can handle your Sandevistan's full capabilities. Most people would think that the things are best in melee or gun fighting, and there is certainly an advantage there, but the real value is in stealth. I said seriously. Stealth? Like sneaking around and hiding? He asked, confused. Not exactly. See, the essence of stealth is in not being detected. The how of that doesn't matter nearly as much as the result. With those optics and Neuroport in addition to your Sandevistan, you'll be able to see enemies, traps and cameras through walls, and with the right planning walk on by them without anyone even knowing, a ghost in the wind. You'd be the ultimate stealth expert. I said with a grin. Fucking Nova, chum. He said eagerly. There is a small issue though, an easy fix but one you'll probably not like. I said honestly. Lay it on me. He said, invested now. You'll need some training shards to learn the ropes. You might have the chrome for it, but without the know-how you'll just fumble around a lot till you figure it out or die since you got caught. You need shards on stealth work, silent takedowns, and most importantly environmental movement. The fixer for Watson, Regina Jones, should be able to get this for you. Reyes might also, but I'm not sure. You study those shards and practice the skills in a safe way till you master them, and when you start taking gigs you'll rise to the top in no time at all. I said seriously. Sounds solid. Didn't think I'd be going to school again, but at least this time it's on my terms. He said with a chuckle. I said my farewell for now since he agreed with the plan, and soon enough had my final checkup with Madame Pomfrey before I was discharged. Roll your wrists and fully open and close each finger, she commanded as she used a spell on my hands. I did as told with a throbbing pain the whole time. Your range of motion is good and the strength of your movements is consistent. I detect no abnormal shakes or problems. The pain will last for 2 weeks or so until the new nerves fully settle, but otherwise you are perfectly healthy, she said, nodding. New nerves? I asked, surprised. I forget that you were never told the full extent of your injuries. When you were originally brought before me the nerves in your hands were dead and needed replacement from the massive amount of electricity sent through them. Your eye suffered a similar trouble as an arc seemed to have lashed out and struck it. She said honestly. Fixing the nerves in my hands was the easy part but my eye was a different matter I take it. I said understanding what she was getting at. Nerves are never easy child. It's long, delicate, meticulous work at the best of times but the more densely clustered the nerves the easier to miss something. She said apologetically. I nodded in understanding as this lined up with what I knew. It was why I was likely in bed so long when in the books and movies even regrowing Harry's arm bones only took a night and most other injuries a few minutes or even hours at most. I do hope I'm not interrupting. Flitwick said as he walked towards us. Not at all, Professor. I was just in the process of giving Mr. Drake his final exam before I discharge him. Madame Pomfrey said casually. Excellent news. I imagine that bed must be terribly lonely to stay in for 2 weeks straight with only a rare visitor. He said sympathetically. I shrugged. I prefer solitude so I didn't mind it at all. I said honestly. To each their own I suppose. Now then we'd best be off if I'm to show you around the castle before dinner. He said cheerfully. You are going to show me around? Don't you have papers to grade? I asked surprised by this. I specifically set this day aside to do this. As head of your house I feel personally responsible for your well-being. You have been excused from classes this week but you are expected to show up on time next week. Naturally this means you need to know the way. Rather than trouble your classmates I decided to show you the way myself. Admittedly I am curious to test your spell work as well along the way. He said honestly. Easy enough I suppose. I said nodding. I stood up and stretched causing my joints to pop pleasantly while I shook off the stiffness from being bedbound so long. I then reached over and closed my fingers around the shaft of the spear resting against the nightstand. Flitwick and Madame Pomfrey both tense up slightly at this but relax when nothing happens. A cooling sensation rushes into me from the spear and the pain in my hands eases considerably to my surprise. I flipped my hand and the spear buzzed and shrank to look almost like a toothpick. Fascinating. I assume you knew how to do this through your connection to it. Flitwick asked curiously. I nodded and slipped the now small spear between the layers of my bandages at the back of my palm. I can control its size and length at will. This size is the best to keep it on hand without drawing attention. I said calmly. Like having a second wand on your person at all times, clever. He said nodding in agreement. I do still need my actual wand though. I assume it's still intact. I asked. It only took minor damage and we had Ollivander confirm that it should still function without any trouble after repairing it. Madame Pomfrey said as she walked off to her desk and brought it back. 66. Learning the way. The wand was still that almost golden yellow but its surface now held scorched lightning burns that marred its features. We've both seen better days haven't we partner? I said as I held the wand carefully. It hummed and golden sparks popped from its tip as though reassuring me and I smiled. I've never seen anything quite like that before. Flitwick said in awe. Vinewood wands are very rare according to Ollivander and among the most peculiar as well. This is probably the first time you've seen such a wand and its master both suffer an injury like this is all. I said as I tapped the air with the wand's tip Lumos. I said and a bright light shone from it. Everything seems in order then. Off you trot, and don't you dare come back here again for at least some months. Madame Pomfrey said shooing me and Flitwick out of the hospital wing. Flitwick as promised led me back to the Ravenclaw common room since it was best to start the tour from the location I would be starting my day. First he showed me his classroom on the 3rd floor in the Apply Named Charms corridor. Then he took me to the ground floor where the Transfiguration classroom was. Professor McGonagall was sitting behind her desk grading papers when we dropped by. Phileas, Mr. Drake, I am pleased to see you out of the hospital wing. If you can I'd like you to attempt to transfigure this quill following the examples given in your textbooks. She said presenting her quill. I hadn't expected to be put on the spot like this but drew my wand from my wrist where I tucked it under my bandages. Verto. I said tapping the quill. Immediately it shivered and the fluffy bit sunk into the main part and the whole thing took on a wooden hue as the shape shifted. Enough. She said stopping me as she picked up my shoddy transfigured item. It's clear you haven't practiced before now but even achieving this much through pure theoretical knowledge is impressive. I dare say I may quite enjoy having you in my upcoming class. She praising me before casually waving her wand over the quill and fixing it back into its normal form. We left the classroom and went up to the 2nd floor where the Dada classroom was located but Quirrell was nowhere to be seen. The 1st floor held the history of magic classroom besides the Transfiguration classroom and Binns was there with a house elf helping him grade the papers. From there we moved to the dungeons where both the Slytherin common room and potions classroom were. It was a cold damp place which made sense given it was under the lake and only heated by the torches on the walls. Snape was in the middle of brewing some sort of potion when we arrived. I sniffed the air and I knew immediately what it was. Pain-relieving potion, close to half done. I said calmly. Correct. I have just added the first 3 drops of poppy extract. What is the next step? Snape demanded as he looked at me seriously. Stir gently counterclockwise twice and then once firmly clockwise and then remove from heat before adding the drop of cobra venom. I said without hesitation. Correct again. He said with a small nod as he did exactly that. And why do we use cobra venom in this potion? He asked. Because it's neurotoxic and in this controlled amount with the other ingredients it is helpful rather than harmful. I answered without hesitation. Very good, Mr. Drake. It seems at least one student will be worth teaching this batch. Off with you now, you'll spoil my focus. He said, dismissing me. My goodness. I do believe that's the first time I've heard him get so close to praise before. Flitwick said in astonishment once we were out of earshot from the room. He's a bit intense, but that's it as far as I can tell. I said honestly. Don't let your classmates hear you or they'll definitely not agree. He said seriously. We left the dungeons after that and headed for the courtyard under the clock tower and then out onto the castle grounds where other students could be seen hanging out. Some were playing games and others studying in the sunlight, with a few older students playing about on brooms in the air overhead. More than a few noticed us and whispered amongst themselves, no doubt about my bandages and eye patch. Flitwick looked at me concerned when this started, but I was unbothered as I had long since grown numb to others' opinions. He didn't seem happy about my lack of care but didn't mention it either as he showed me to the greenhouses that I almost had to stop myself from drooling over. We didn't go in, but even from outside I identified no less than 12 decently priced plants. He pointed out Hagrid's hut and the edge of the forbidden forest while warning me to stay out of the latter. Finally we headed back to the castle and to one of the towers that he introduced as the astrology tower, with the classroom being an open-air one at the top. If you have any trouble remembering the way, please don't hesitate to ask one of your fellow students or the portraits. He said as we arrived again outside the grand hall, as dinner was going to start within 30 minutes and we were only slightly early. I sat down at the Ravenclaw long table and chose to wait quietly while practicing transfiguration, since Flitwick and Kanagal were already sitting at the professor's table. 67. Returning to life. There was already cups waiting on the tables along with pitchers of water, but in this case I just needed the cup. The professors watched me carefully as I tapped the cup and recited the transfiguration spell over and over after each attempt. At first the cup changed slowly and in small ways, but as I experimented with the spell I sped it up and got more precise with the changes. When time came for dinner to truly start and the other students were pouring into the great hall, I could turn the pewter cup into a delicate fine china teacup with no flaws. Bloody hell. Alex mate, you look dreadful. Terry said in shock as he sat across from me. We heard you'd gotten into some sort of magical accident and had been in the hospital wing this whole time, but we didn't know it was so bad. Mike said as he sat next to Terry. This castle apparently has some dangerous secrets in it nobody knows about. I found one and paid for being careless around it. I said with a shrug. Does it hurt? Mandy Brocklehurst, the little witch sorted to Ravenclaw this year, asked concerned after sitting next to Mike. It does, but I'll be taking pain-relieving potion for it so it won't interfere with my studies or classwork. I answered honestly. What about your eye? Terry asked. It's not gone but may as well be. I'm only barely able to tell, there's light hitting it when I open it. I'll replace it once I find a suitable option. I said frankly. Bloody hell mate, that's gotta be rough. Mike said and I shook my head. It's like closing one eye but permanently. Half my field of vision is gone but otherwise it doesn't really affect me too badly. I said honestly. Since you're here I take it that means you'll be joining us for classes from now on. Terry asked, changing the subject. I'm off for the rest of the week but starting next Monday, yeah. I said with a nod. I'll let you look over my notes when we get back to the common room so you aren't too lost in class. Mike offered helpfully. I'd appreciate it. I studied while in the hospital wing but have no clue where you guys are in classes. I said gratefully. Dinner started and platters of different foods appeared on the tables and all conversation was put aside. I myself ate several lamb chops, mutton steaks and a small mound of mashed potatoes. At some point those around me couldn't help but stare at me in shock as I downed an inhuman amount of food. I couldn't help it, as with the one-piece physique I needed as much food as I could eat to heal quickly and grow stronger. I had been living on potions that tasted dreadful for 2 weeks at this point and also couldn't help but indulge in the food that actually tasted delicious. Did they starve you or something in the hospital wing mate? Terry ended up asked after dessert was served. Or something. I lived off of potions that made it so I didn't need to eat, but the taste was something I would rather never deal with again. I said with a slight shudder. Aren't potions usually sweetened though? Mandy asked with a confused look. Usually, but Madame Pomfrey prefers her medicine to taste like it. Probably so you would be extra motivated not to have to drink any more. I said helplessly. It wasn't all bad though, you didn't have to deal with Professor Snape on Fridays at least. Mike said and I gave him a look that made him pause. No. He said in disbelief, but I nodded to confirm that yes, I did in fact have to deal with Snape still. Not even going to the hospital wing is enough to escape, we are truly doomed. Terry said dramatically. He is a bit intense but I didn't think he was all that bad. I said honestly. Terry snorted. A bit intense, he says. That's like saying dragons are just fire-breathing lizards. He said, shaking his head. Maybe he wasn't that bad since you were in the hospital wing, but he's been a right menace for the rest of us. He doesn't even give points if we do well. Mike said seriously. The meal ended after that and a few of the older Ravenclaws came to make sure I could get back to the common room alright, which was nice. Once actually back in the common room, Mike, Terry and Mandy all broke out their notes for me to borrow. I left them all stumped as it took me only about 30 minutes to read through all of them and memorize the contents. After that we all turned in for the day. It was strange going to sleep for the first time in over 2 weeks without a potion forcing the issue. It was also nice being able to fully release my observation haki without someone magically backhanding it. I woke up when the first rays of the sun shone through the window of my room on my face the next day. The first thing I did was head for the bathroom to get a quick bath since I was fairly certain I hadn't had one in over 2 weeks. With that done I dressed for the day and rebandaged my hands. It wasn't perfect like Madame Pomfrey's wrappings but I knew I'd need practice to get better and it was good enough. I chose to ignore the dull throbbing pain in my hands as I left the common room and headed for the Great Hall to eat breakfast. I was not the first person in the hall but I was one of the first 10. I asked for a plate of eggs, bacon and scones with gravy and it magically appeared before me piled high. Clearly the house elves noticed my large appetite, wonderfully helpful creatures those. 68. Room of Requirement. I ate my meal in a hurry before setting off for the 7th floor. I always intended to go to the ROR but after my injury and hospital stay that had been delayed. Now however I had 3 free days to myself before I had to go to classes like a normal student and I refused to waste them laying about. I earned several looks from other students as I walked through the halls but soon I was alone on the 7th floor. I found the moving tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy trying to teach trolls ballet easily. I need a place to hide things. I repeated in my head 3 times. The wall opposite the tapestry shimmered as a wooden door with iron bands appeared. I pulled the handle and walked into the vast room filled with what appeared to be random things. I grinned however as I knew that this was the room of hidden things, the configuration of the ROR that held generations of items tossed in here by students. Most of it was junk but I knew there was treasure here as well. Just here at the entrance for example was several broken pieces of furniture and cloudy expired potions but there was also a hat that I picked up the magic from with my haki. The rest of this can be ignored for now but I need to find that diadem. I thought seriously and focused and moving through the barely large enough paths in between the piled up items. Of course I didn't just totally ignore these many treasures as even while I moved through the paths looking for Voldemort's Horcrux I was appraising anything and everything that looked intact. Most of it held little value since it was merely lucky but I found several treasures that I righteously plundered. A magical monocle that revealed hidden runes at whatever it was looking at. A student spell crafting research journal from 300 years ago. A cursed necklace that made boobs bigger at the cost of the wearer's reproductive ability. A phoenix's eggshell and finally a scarf that constantly radiated warmth. I sold the necklace for a solid 1,000 system coins and put the rest away. The rest of the stuff I saw were either barely worth anything or so cursed that even touching it would have been a very bad idea. Forget the room of hidden things. This place should be called the room of cursed or broken nonsense. I thought with a scoff as I kept going. I had to admit that the soul fragment in the diadem was a sneaky thing as I almost missed it before it made a mistake and retracted its presence fully. Unfortunately for it, spotting a void in my perception was a whole hell of a lot easier than a weak magical presence. It was pretty obvious the soul fragment didn't understand how observation haki worked or it would realize the instant it chose to vanish I locked onto it. Observation haki worked by blanketing an area in your range of perception like a sort of extra layer of understanding. It didn't fully rely on your body's normal senses though, so it also included the areas you couldn't reasonably perceive like directly behind you. What this meant was that by withdrawing so fully like that the soul fragment actually created an area of blindness in the observation haki field, incredibly conspicuous. The soul fragment seemed to figure this out when my eye narrowed right on it sitting on the head of a dressing mannequin. "There you are," I said with a smirk. The fragment switched tactics from hiding to trying to tempt me to put the diadem on. Whispers of endless wisdom, knowledge unlike anything the world had seen before, power, the works. I frowned and unleashed my conqueror's haki at this, causing the soul fragment to recoil in pain as my will pressed on it. Against a normal person or animal, conqueror's haki would at most knock them out when used like this, but this was not a normal person. This was part of a person's soul and a raw exposed part at that. In this case it was the full power of my complete soul pressing down on this mere fragment of someone else's. The winner was obvious. I didn't let up with this pressure even as I lifted the diadem off the head of the mannequin. I only stopped when I safely stored the cursed thing in my inventory. Once that was done I breathed out a sigh of relief. In truth I was quite worried that something might go wrong when I took this thing. Thankfully it went off without a hitch and I could finally focus on selling the contents of this room without care to my system. Even the broken things were worth at least a single coin, and with the sheer amount of stuff here I was looking at quite the payday. I only needed to be touching something and technically owning it to sell it to my system, and since all this stuff was technically abandoned I could claim it with a thought. I went back to the beginning of the room and started my selling spree. 5 coins, 2, 7, 10, 200. I sold everything I could get my hands on safely and didn't want to keep myself. Since I was moving at the speed of thought and touch, the room's content was shrinking at a visible rate as I sold and sold and sold. Or so I'd like to say, but in truth there was so much stuff I was barely denting the front edge of the mountain of stuff. I was also finding stuff hidden inside other stuff that fell out when the item was sold. For example, inside a broken vase was a bag of 30 galleons, or inside a dresser drawer a silver engagement ring thrown away after some betrayal. 69. Room of Requirement 2. I spent a long time in the room just clearing out the junk, hours at least. Even then I had made little progress, maybe 0.5% of everything. Additionally, I was forced to stop temporarily as my inventory was full and I had to drop 3,000 system coins to expand it to a 30-meter cubed space. Still, even with that expense I earned more than I lost. An extra 2,712 more in fact. My potential profit was in theory much higher, but most of the stuff worth selling for profit was also worth keeping for myself. That doesn't even begin to start with the diadem that had a price tag of 500,000 coins. I had to admit I expected more for a relic of the founders, but the system was fair in its evaluation for a single reason: the soul fragment's corruption. As it turned out, when Voldemort stuffed the bit of his soul into this thing, he rendered most of its magical value void. The corruptive influence of the soul fragment eroded and fused with the enchantments of the diadem, so if you remove the soul fragment you remove the magic. Since the whole thing was basically useless unless your name was Voldemort, the system priced it based entirely off the materials, historical and soul fragment's value. I did confirm that selling the diadem would deprive Voldemort of its immortality granting effect as well. It was a bit tricky as I couldn't just ask the system, but what I could do was see if a similar thing was for sale within the system, and lo and behold it was. Attached to the description of that soul fragment was a disclaimer mentioning that the soul's connection to Voldemort had been severed. Interestingly, there was exactly 7 soul fragments in the shop and the main soul of Voldemort as well. This told me that the items in the shop weren't the true items in this world of mine but a copy of them. Otherwise I'd be terribly confused how Voldemort was on the back of Quirrell's head and in the system as well. I didn't hesitate to sell the diadem with that confirmation and earned a large sum of profit in an instant. Tempus, I said after drawing my wand. 5:30, I've spent all day in here. Best if I spread the clearing of this place out for multiple days over the next 7 years than rush and waste my precious early school time on it. I muttered as I finally left the room. Dinner was just starting when I finally reached the Great Hall and walked in. "Oi, Alex, where the bloody hell have you been? We looked all over for you for hours and couldn't find a trace," Terry demanded when I sat down. "Sorry about that, got a tad occupied with something I found is all." "Not to worry, I was careful this time," I said reassuringly. "That's not the point. You vanished, and the last time that happened you were laid up in the hospital wing for 2 weeks straight," Terry argued. "I said I was careful this time. And look, totally fine," I said, showing my perfectly intact clothes. "You'll forgive us if we are less than thrilled at the idea of you going and touching something you shouldn't have again," Mike said, and I shrugged. "I get that, but I don't need someone watching me all the time. I learned my lesson. Besides, can you blame me for exploring the castle? This place is huge and full of secrets waiting to be found, so long as you are careful," I said, and they reluctantly nodded in agreement. "You just got out of the hospital wing, so maybe save the exploring for later, yeah," Mike said, and I sighed in annoyance but agreed all the same. After that there wasn't much worth mentioning for the night as we ate and then headed to the common room. Mike, Terry and Mandy were all working on their homework for the day, as apparently Ravenclaw were not the sort to put it off. I myself turned in for the night as I still wanted to maintain my dawn to dusk wake schedule if I could for consistency. The next morning I woke up with the sun's rise and cleaned my teeth before getting ready for the day. I planned to rip off the rakeages technique from the Naruto universe and use electricity to stimulate and strengthen my body. With the One Piece physique, this should result in my body not only recovering faster than normal but also in my body growing stronger in general. I sat cross-legged on my bed as I tried to envision my energy moving into and through my cells, bolstering and improving them. I felt my powers do something while a sort of warmth tingled from my body all over, but a frankly dreadful smelling sweat started coming out of me and I gagged. I rushed to the bathrooms, earning disgusted looks from the other Ravenclaws awake as the smell hit them. I had to scrub hard with soap and water for at least 30 minutes before the smell went away, and I swore to never try it again without a bath nearby. I was far more ravenous at breakfast than normal, which I took as a good sign though. I didn't expect instant results, but based off the One Piece world's usual ways, a bigger appetite meant a good training session or greater strength. Either were just fine for me. Something else I noticed was that the clouds outside were grayed out and likely forming into a rainy day. Not a storm though, as I felt no lightning at all from it. I considered adding lightning artificially but chose not to in case I got caught. 70. Understanding the grind. As I had agreed, I didn't go exploring the castle today but chose to head for the library. Hogwarts Library was considered one of the most complete and oldest repositories of magical knowledge in the world. Not only because it was originally created from the founders' own donated libraries but from successive generations of professors and students adding to it freely. A slight problem, however, was that many of these texts were in ancient languages from over 1,000 years ago or were filled with outdated terms and wording that needed context to figure out these days. The library was also massive and not very well organized due to students always forgetting to put the books back in their proper places. Supposedly Madame Pants, who was in charge of the library, knew the positions of them all on the shelves but was typically too unapproachable to ask. I found a spot in the library that was fairly hidden and opened up my system shop before moving over to the skill section. I scrolled down the list till I found the skill I had been eyeing previously but couldn't afford for 50,000 coins, multitasking. The skill was a fairly simple and self-explained one from just its name, but basically it split my mind into different parts that could each focus on a task. Its basic version was only a single extra thought stream, but it gained an addition stream for the second level and then 2 more and then 4 and so on. I purchased it and crushed the skill stone without hesitation. It was a bit strange at first, like 2 different voices talking at the same time yet never overlapping. Still, the reason I wanted this skill in particularly was to maximize the effect of my Logia and Haki abilities. Honestly, it wouldn't really even be like I had an extra thought stream while I was studying, since from now on I'd have one of my thought streams using my observation Haki constantly to monitor my surroundings. It took me a few minutes to adjust after I started, but it was worth it. I got up from my table and started checking the shelves for little read books on charms. The way I could tell if a book wasn't read much was by looking at its edges and cover. Most books, even magically protected, showed wear on these parts if they saw much use. Additionally, I could look at the dust on the shelves to see if a book was removed recently or not. Soon enough I found a charms book that looked dusty but almost untouched that I brought back to my chosen desk to look over. The book was a little disappointing as it was mostly theory from 108 years ago, but there were couple new spells I mentally noted down. I saw Terry looking for me in the library while I was reading, and even the moment he spotted me thanks to my Haki. "You aren't sneaking up on me, Terry?" I said casually without turning to look at him. "Aw man, how'd you know?" he asked, disappointed he failed to sneak up on me. "I have very good perception," I said calmly. "You are probably gonna be a pain to prank, huh? Anyways, why are you studying on a Saturday? You should be relaxing or hanging out with the rest of us," he said with mock sternness. "I happen to like studying, thank you very much. Besides, this book has some interesting stuff in it. Like this spell here that harms only spiders, Aranea ixami. Completely harmless to anyone who isn't a spider but potentially lethal to even an acromantula if directly struck," I said, pointing out the spell in question. "Okay, that is pretty bloody interesting, but studying is boring. Don't you want to have fun, flirt with some pretty girls, play pranks on people, that sort of stuff?" he asked temptingly. "I mean, I won't say no to some quick fun, but I won't slack off just because I can," I said honestly. "Ugh, you sound like one of those stuffy 6th or 7th years. Lighten up, mate, we have plenty of time to study, just later," he said, exasperated. "You do realize those upper years probably sound like that because they goofed off for their first few years and are worried they won't get a good job after graduating as a result, right?" I tossed back and he looked struck. "That, no way, right?" he said, wavering. "Here's a quote for you that should sum it up nicely. If you learn to accept mediocrity, that is all you will ever find," I said with sagely expression. "Who said that?" he asked, astonished. "Me, just now," I said with a chuckle. "You are the worst," he said, playfully punching my shoulder but smiling all the same. "Hey now, no need to get abusive. It was a good quote, right?" I said, playfully fending him off. "Yeah, it was, if only it wasn't you who said it. I might just take it seriously then," he said, rolling his eyes. "It's true though. If you accept only being good enough to get by, then that's all you'll amount to in life, good enough. Dumbledore didn't get where he is by accepting good enough, he wanted excellence, and excellence demands discipline," I said honestly. "Maybe, but there's gotta be time to just have fun, right?" he said, looking torn between accepting the grind and not wanting to do it. "Of course there is. The trick is not to go out of your way to find it. Like when you tried to sneak up on me. That was a spur-of-the-moment thing for you, right?" I asked, and he nodded. "So just wait for those moments. If you have to force fun, then it's not really fun," I said seriously. 71, small spat. "Why do you always sound so much older than the rest of us anyways?" Terry asked, changing the subject after accepting what I said. "Life hasn't always been kind to me. That's all I'll say on that," I said firmly. "Must have been rough. Learn to lighten up though, all uphill from here, right?" he asked with a grin. I smiled and nodded. "That's the hope at least." I agreed. He ended up joining me in studying in the library till lunchtime. I finished up the book I had found by then and headed for the Great Hall to eat. Terry marveled at how fast I read as we left the library, and I merely chuckled and left it alone. "Look at Longbottom, can't even watch where he is going." An unfamiliar boy's voice was heard around the corner as we neared the Great Hall. As Terry and I rounded the corner, we saw a group of 3 Slytherins standing near a fallen Gryffindor. I recognized Malfoy, Crabbe and Goyle, and thanks to what Malfoy had said, Neville as well on the ground. I casually drew my wand and pointed it at the Malfoy. "Pedum retro," I said 3 times while flicking my wrist 3 times. 3 blue spells shot through the air and struck the Slytherins, who weren't prepared to be attacked. They looked confused when nothing happened to them, even as they panicked and checked themselves over hurriedly. Malfoy then sneered at me. "Look who it is, the boy who got himself blown up on the first day of school. He can't even cast a proper spell," he mocked, and Terry bristled, but I stopped him. "There's no need, he'll be regretting saying that in a moment," I said with a calm smile. "Humph, as if anyone believed you after that failure." Malfoy sneered before his expression stiffened. He had gone to take a step to walk off all imperiously, and rather than his right foot moving forward like he intended, his left foot moved backwards, causing him to fall down. Crabbe and Goyle soon followed suit, falling to the floor with confused expressions. "Foot reversal charm. Only noticeable after you start walking. I'm not a fan of bullying, Mr. Malfoy, it's disgraceful and crude," I said with the same calm smile as before. "Are you all right, Mr. Longbottom?" I then asked the odd Gryffindor on the floor still. Why yes. Thank you. He stuttered nervously but grateful. You are welcome, now I do believe you should be picking yourself up no. I said with a slight tease. Alright. He stuttered in embarrassment as he got up before hurrying off. You'll regret this when I tell my father. He'll have you expelled. Malfoy hissed angrily as he tried and failed to get to his feet. You overestimate your father's influence, he's on the board of governors not the headmaster of the school. At most I'll get a warning for breaking the rules since nothing but your ego has been harmed. Now then I do believe we have some food waiting for us so I'll bid you good day. I said casually before walking to the Great Hall and inside it. That was bloody brilliant. You might not know since you've been in the hospital wing this whole time but Malfoy's been insufferable to everyone. He usually has spats with Potter and Weasley but he's gone off on others too if he gets a chance. Feels nice seeing someone putting him in his place. Terry said with a wide grin as we sat down at the Ravenclaw table. I've met people like him before. Self-centered, arrogant and petty. Best to quickly let them know not to mess with you unless you can stomach scenes like that all the time. I said with a shrug. You say that like it's easy. He's always got a group with him and that bit about his father's no joke. Lord Malfoy is a very powerful pureblood noble apparently, dangerous too. Terry said seriously. Believe me there isn't a single person who'd hear about this and take it as anything more than a childish spat. If anything his father will scold him and tell him to get back at me at most. I said with a shrug. We started eating after that and both smirked when Malfoy and his cronies entered the Great Hall about 15 minutes later followed by Flitwick. All three of the Slytherins glared at me as Flitwick cheerfully walked over. I'm told that foot reversal charm was your doing Alex, marvelous spell work. Simply textbook. That said I must ask that you refrain from using spells on fellow students. He said both praising and scolding me. Not even to stop said students from bullying another. I asked and he paused. I believe I may not have been told the whole story. He said with a frown. It's a fairly simple matter really. Terry and I were on the way to the Great Hall from the library and happened to catch Malfoy picking on Longbottom for falling down. I detest bullying you see and just so happened to have learned a new charm that would give Malfoy a taste of his own medicine. I used the spell, explained to Malfoy the error of his ways and then headed here after making sure Longbottom was okay. I explained the whole event from start to finish without even a single embellishment. Defending your fellow students is a good and honorable thing but next time try and find a professor instead of taking matters into your own hands. He said as a light warning before walking away to the professor's table. 72. Selling. I didn't plan on taking that warning seriously though since it was better to ask forgiveness than permission. If I could either act or tattle naturally I would act instead. After lunch Terry went off to go find Mike while I myself headed back to the library. I found my spot unoccupied and sat back down but didn't grab a new book but opened my contacts and spent the 50 coins to open a channel to Rockwell. The world grayed out around me as all the subtle sounds of the library were quieted and a white screen appeared in front of me that soon shimmered to show me Rockwell. He was sweating and seemed to be surrounded by dark rock and what looked like large sticks gathered together in a rough bowl shape. This isn't a great time. He hissed looking around warily. I felt my eyebrow twitch. Yes I can see that. I might be wrong but you appear to be in the Wyvern Trench, in a nest no less. I said almost in awe at the sheer suicidal urge that surely must have overcome his mind to even dare come near here. Yes. Now go away before you get me caught. He said nervously. You do realize time is stopped while the contact window is open right? I asked with a slight chuckle as he froze. How on earth? Forget it. What do you want? He asked relaxing slightly now that he understood he was fairly safe. A few things actually. The first is to apologize for vanishing for so long. As you can see I got injured fairly severely due to my own carelessness and was laid up for most of this time. The second is because I happen to have obtained a few items that I believe you'd find useful. I said honestly. I was wondering about the bandages and eye covering. As you can see however this isn't the best place to talk business. Give me a few minutes to escape the beasts of this trench and I would be more receptive to such things. He said helplessly. Very well then, here are some coins. You merely need to hold them and think of my full name to open a contact with me from your end. Take your time, I need you alive and well to trade after all. I said sending him 50 coins before ending the contact and getting up to grab another book. This time it was a book on potions that I immediately realized was of a higher year. I stubbornly chose to it read anyway since even if it was a rather high leap of logic in some parts one could still learn from referencing this with what I already knew. For example this book had a recipe for a potion of flesh mending that shared many ingredients and brewing requirements with the weaker but more common Wiggeneld potion. Despite this however the description of the potion's effects made it obvious it was a far superior choice between the two. The problem was that to brew it successfully you needed much more refined heat control and understanding of timing. A couple of its ingredients were also on the slightly more valuable side of things such as mandrake juice and dragon's blood. The blood was easy enough to get as the dragons in reserves were regularly bled a small amount for sale but mandrake juice was much pricier. The strange screaming plants were hard to grow to maturity as they literally got up out of pots if they were dissatisfied with their environment and ran away to who knows where. This as a result meant unless carefully watched or tended by a master one's product literally left you with nothing to show for your effort. The seeds were quite expensive for this reason, and the juice from mature mandrakes sold for 20 galleons an ounce. As I was carefully making comparisons between this recipe and the one for Wiggeneld, the world grayed out and a screen appeared with Rockwell on it. Apologies for the delay. One of the beasts turned out to be a bit trickier than expected to lose, he said as he dabbed his forehead with a cloth to get rid of his cooling sweat. Not a problem, was only doing some light studying while I waited anyways, I said, waving it off. Now then, I believe you mentioned having some items you believed might interest me, he said curiously. I smiled. Indeed. First is a moke skin bag with an expanded space of about 10 feet in diameter. All items put in this bag weigh nothing and take up no more space than the bag itself on your person, I said as I took out the brown leather satchel bag to show him. Incredible. With something like that I could collect more specimens and even perhaps bring my equipment with me instead of having to start anew or take many days to move everything to the new site, he said with an excited expression. My thoughts precisely. The next item I have is a hat of ignorance. Despite that less than stellar sounding name, this hat allows whoever is wearing it slip past the perception of others. Not invisibility, mind you, but unless someone is specifically looking for you with it on, their perception will just slip right over you like they fail to register your presence. Once more, an incredible tool for you that must regularly sneak around beasts for your research, I said, grandly describing the items I had found in the ROR. 73, selling, too. These are wonderful items, but the price for them must also be quite high as well, Rockwell said seriously. That depends on your current resources actually. Judging from your willingness to venture into the Wyvern Trench, though, you shouldn't find too much trouble collecting the things I'm interested in. For the hat I want a specimen implant. I have another customer who would likely benefit from such a thing quite a good deal. As for the bag, I want some species X seeds and a unique creature from that arc, the phoenix, I said seriously. You mean the flaming bird that shows up during the heat waves and then vanishes afterwards? He asked with a frown. Yes, while I highly doubt it's the same as my world's phoenixes, I am still quite interested in it, I said, nodding. I'm not unwilling to try, but how would I even go about acquiring such a thing? He asked, confused. The bird is a flame eater. Once you find one, you simply need to use a flamethrower to burn it until it's tamed. The easiest way to do so is to find one and then wait for the heatwave to end before building a cage around the ashes that fall to the ground when it ends. The next heatwave will revive the bird from the ashes, and burning it inside the cage will tame it easily, I explained honestly. That sounds like nonsense, he said flatly. I shrugged. I didn't make the thing, so I can only tell you the rules I know. If I had to guess, though, the people who designed that arc did so based off the myths surrounding the things. How they made it is beyond me, but they did, and it's your profit, I said honestly. Finding the beast and tracking it during a heatwave will prove time consuming, but if taming it is as easy as you have stated, then I should only need a few days at most to deliver it to you. As for the specimen implant and species X seeds, I have those on hand right now, he said before a prompt came up. Trading partner Edmund Rockwell wishes to give the user items 5x species X seed, treasure, specimen implant, accept items Y/N. I accepted the items and sent over the 2 items from my end along with an additional 1,000 system coins. Contact me when you have the bird, and of course if you find anything interesting or valuable. Naturally I take commissions as well, I said, and he nodded with a satisfied expression before ending the contact. I was all in all quite satisfied with this sale of mine. Naturally the specimen implant was something I prepared for David, as it would give him a massive boost. Unlike with Rockwell and the others in his world, David's world focused on cybernetics, and thus he should in theory be able to sync the implant to his neuroport to access its true functions. If these were based on the game and explorer notes, then the implant would give him the ability to understand all languages in real time, possess a limited inventory, and have an incredibly powerful bio-monitoring operational system to keep his other implants from driving him nuts. Additionally, it would allow him to level up, which from a realistic standpoint probably meant modifying his body's innate abilities. That was my hope anyways. If he can increase his speed and strength using the implant along with his health, then he'd quickly become nigh unstoppable in his world, even if his crone were shut down somehow. The seeds and phoenix, though, were entirely for me. The species X plant was not unique as far as the magical world was concerned, as the venomous tentacula filled a similar niche. What the later of the two couldn't do, however, was actively differentiate friend from foe. This made species X the perfect thing for guarding an area. The plant could be trained to attack intruders in an area like a guard dog that only requires water and fertilizer every now and again. I intended to gift 1 seed to Professor Sprout so I can use her to test how the plant would react to the magical herbology methods. If the result is good, I can use the remaining 4 for myself one day after I find a base to operate out of. If the result isn't good, I can always just sell them to some other world, as even without magical herbology the plants were still excellent defensive measures. As for the phoenix, that was just because I highly doubted I'd ever be able to own an actual phoenix from this world, and I'm a nerd who really wanted one after reading the books. I know it's not the same thing, but Ark's phoenix is still a cool pet to have and similar enough. Plus it would serve as an excellent way to get on Hagrid's good side, as I could ask him to take care of it when I was busy with schoolwork. I still had 3 eggs to trade him anyways, so his friendship and help procuring stuff was all but assured. With this in mind, I smiled and went back to studying the potions book I had grabbed. 74, Teaching Moment. I memorized the book just before dinner time, but just knowing what it said wasn't enough. I'd need a few more books and even personal experience to truly understand its contents. Not surprising really, since it was a higher year book most likely. Mike and Terry met me on the way to the Great Hall and we walked together the rest of the way. You ready for your classes on Monday? Mike asked curiously. It's herbology and charms, right? I shouldn't have any trouble with those. I said confidently. Herbology can be a bit tiring since it's literally hands-on work mostly, but charms is not bad if you follow the directions. Most of us have even started to get the hang of the wand lighting spell. Terry said, and Mike nodded. I already mastered all the spells in the first year spell book over the summer. Don't have any practical experience with herbology besides identifying plants though. I said honestly, and they both froze. Are you joking, mate? The whole book? Mike asked in disbelief. Well, and about half of next year's book too. Once you figure out the trick to it, most spells and the things are pretty easy. I said with a shrug. What trick? Terry asked eagerly. Intent, precision and uniqueness. You need to be able to understand the right mindset for each spell. You need to understand precisely how the spell is pronounced, and finally you need to adjust your wand movement to suit your own body. It took me a whole afternoon to figure out that last one. I said seriously. Adjust to your body? What do you mean? Mike asked confused. Everyone's body is different. Here, put your palm against mine. I said, holding up my right hand. He looked confused but did as I asked. You see how your fingers are longer and narrower than mine? That's what I mean. The best way for you to move your wand is different than the way I should move my wand as a result. For you it might be a slightly smaller movement while mine would be slightly larger. Get it? I said, and they both looked enlightened. Blimey, mate, how'd you figure that out? Terry asked amazed. Practice. I repeated the spells over and over again following the instructions precisely, but the effect was less than perfect, so I started messing up intentionally to figure out if it was me making a mistake or the instructions being flawed. I repeated this with the other spells and soon figured out the problem. The author of the book wrote out their own experience casting the spells. We aren't them, however. Our bodies are different, so our movements must also be slightly different. I explained honestly. Lumos. Mike said, attempting the wand lighting charm slightly differently following the advice I gave him. Immediately a weak but steady glow manifested from the tip of his wand. Bloody hell. It worked. Terry exclaimed in excitement. Your wand movement was good, but from the glow I think your intent is off. What are you thinking when you cast the spell? I asked calmly. About the wand lighting up. Mike said confused. No wonder it's so weak. Now imagine you are locked in a room that's pitch black. Imagine how much you'd want a light. Once you have this image, try the spell again. I suggested helpfully. He furrowed his eyebrows as he tried to imagine the thing I told him to and then flicked his wand gently. Lumos. He said, and a bright steady light burst to life at the tip of his wand. Incredible. 5 points to Ravenclaw for the wonderful use of the wand lighting charm. A small familiar voice said from behind us. How long have you been there? I asked, horrified, as we quickly turned to face Flitwick. I arrived behind you just in time to hear you mention your little trick to your friends. I must admit I hadn't expected a first year to understand spell work at that level, much less before school even started. Truly your talent leaves me in awe. The kindly little professor said with a wide smile. I'm flattered you say so, but I'm more concerned about how I didn't notice you walk up to begin with. I said seriously. A modified notice me not charm, young Alex. Your unusual perception technique is impressive but not flawless. A normal notice me not likely wouldn't work on your technique, but I modified mine to create a false perception rather than push all perception away, an illusion if you will. He explained, pleased with himself. I don't know whether to be impressed or horrified that you created a modification of that spell just to slip by my perception. I said with a hint of bitterness. What perception technique? Terry asked confused. I suppose there's no use hiding it. I have a way to sort of project my perception around me a distance in every direction. Think of it like an extra sense. I've been using it nearly constantly. I said with a sigh. Indeed. It's quite the novel thing, though for those of us rather sensitive perceptions it's rather uncomfortable. Like being stared at by thousands of eyes in every direction. Flitwick said cheerfully. That sounds brilliant. Can we learn how to do that? Mike asked eagerly. Probably not. It's a feeling. Hard to describe really. I said, unsure if it was even possible to learn Haki without the ability stone in this world. It's spiritual in nature, Mr. Boot. Anything related to the soul is rare and difficult matter to learn without high talent, and like Alex clearly possesses. Flitwick said, saving me from trying to explain how it even worked to say no to teaching them. 75. Life lesson. That's not fair though. Terry complained. No, it isn't. But life has never been fair. Anyone who says otherwise is lying or willfully ignorant. I say honestly. And what makes you say that? Flitwick asked, not denying it outright but obviously in disagreement. Let's ignore the argument that fairness is subjective to begin with and start with one's birth. True fairness would be everyone being born identical. Same size, shape, color, the whole deal. That's not how it works, so there's something unfair. What about talent? Some people are incredibly talented and others can barely reach mediocrity even with the most strenuous effort. That's unfair. Some people can go through their entire lives without a single setback while others hit tragedies and stumbling blocks the whole way. That's not fair at all. Fair isn't the base state of the world, it's what you must define for yourself. I said seriously. I cannot deny the truth of your words. But do you mean to say that one must simply accept their lot in life? Never strive for more? Flitwick asked seriously. I shook my head to quote someone great, control what you can control and ignore that which you can't. What you do with the gift of life is for you as an individual to decide. But you have that gift all the same. I said honestly. Flitwick smiled at this. That is an excellent quote. Who said it? He asked happily. I grinned. Me, just now. I said with a laugh. Terry groaned at that and Mike snickered while Flitwick looked taken back before laughing. A tad arrogant are we, calling yourself great? TSK, for shame. Mike teased. I shrugged. I am pretty great, aren't I though? I even helped you figure out the trick to casting spells. I said with a dramatic flourish and bow. And so humble as well. Flitwick joked and we all laughed. Perhaps the topic had gotten heavy for a moment, but that was how I saw the world. Unfair but subject to your own and others' will. Where you begin you can't control, but where you go from there is up to you. Still, with that last bit we were in good moods when we finally entered the Great Hall. We barely got seated before Flitwick started bragging about what I had just said to the other professors. There were a few frowns among them at first, such as McGonagall, Dumbledore and Sprout, but once Flitwick explained the deeper thoughts and quote I gave, they all smiled with approval. Even Snape seemed to faintly nod in agreement with it, though that may have been a trick of the light. Needless to say, I got a mental thumbs up from the professor's table, which would definitely come in handy. The meal was almost the same as it was the last 3 days, and I realized I was going to get bored of this food quickly. It was all delicious, of course, since the house elves had clearly mastered each dish, but the problem was there was no variety. This meal was virtually identical in all ways. The dishes weren't special or unusual or even just slightly off. The flavor of each dish was the same as the previous dinner, just as the lunch and breakfast were the same. One hobby of mine from my previous life was experimenting with food: Thai, Indian, Cajun, French, Chinese, Japanese. It didn't matter, I'd try it all just to experience a difference in flavor. One of my favorite pastimes was even making cheap ramen and adding whatever I had in the fridge just to see if it turned out good or not. Naturally, I'd get bored real fast after eating the same thing over and over again. While I ate, I decided then and there I was going to bring some cookbooks to those house elves to get some real variety hitting these table. Soon enough I had eaten my fill and headed to the washroom in the boys' dorm in the common room. I was alone, which worked out well as I closed my eyes and began trying to temper my body with electricity once more. I learned from my previous time though and stopped up my nose so the stench didn't mess up my focus. I almost came to regret that though, as at some point the tingly warmth in my body turned into a full body ache as my skin was covered from head to toe with this oily stuff that positively reeked. I was forced to stop and scrub it off or risk being too sore to even move, much less clean myself up. It was 10:37 when I finally finished scrubbing myself and tucked into bed. The next morning I woke up absolutely ravenous. My body wasn't sore anymore, but it felt like my stomach was caving in as it rumbled and made my hunger known. I had to admit it wasn't for nothing though, as I genuinely felt lighter than the day before, stronger. Further proof of my improvement was the sheer amount of food I consumed at breakfast. So much in fact that everyone who was starting to get used to my appetite were left stunned again. Seriously mate, where do you even put all that food? Mike asked in disbelief. In my stomach, of course. I need a lot of food to fuel my body is all. I said like that explained anything. Are you sure you are a human and I don't know, a whale in disguise? Terry asked jokingly. It's not that bad yet. I said, rolling my eyes. It gets worse. They both exclaimed at once. 76, teaching. I chuckled at that. Of course it does. My appetite comes from my body needing the energy to grow and support itself. The older I get and the stronger I get, the more I'll need to fuel myself. I explained honestly. What kind of ridiculous body do you have? Terry asked in horror. I shrugged. It is what it is. I said dismissively. Right, well, are you planning to hole up in the library again today? Mike asked, changing the subject. Nah, was going to practice some spells I couldn't all that much over the summer. I said honestly. Which ones? Terry asked, interested. The cutting charm, disarming charm and fire summoning charm. I said calmly. Diffindo, Expelliarmus, and I don't know the last one. Mike said, intrigued. Igneo, summons fire based on the user's intent. Naturally not exactly something I could practice in a room. I explained. Think you could teach us? Terry asked, hopeful. Sure, I don't mind. I agreed easily. We left the Great Hall together after that and headed for the castle's courtyard. We weren't the only ones either, as it was quite the popular place on a weekend day like today. The place was a grassy area surrounded by arched pathways made of wood and metal. At the far end was a path out onto the castle grounds that was grassy but with the occasional flower or weed. I led us out this path and pointed at the short tree sitting at the edge of the lake in the distance. We'll practice over there since there's no real chance of accidents that way. I said, and they nodded. Reaching the spot in question took a few minutes due to how massive the grounds actually were. The lake was smooth here at the shore since today wasn't a very windy day and looked like dark tinted glass. We were safe from the water anyways as the tree is a small distance up the incline leading into the lake. Alright, so I'll go first and then you two try and copy me so I can see what you might need help with. I said as I drew my wand and pointed it at the tree Defindo. I spoke while flicking my wrist to slash the wand tip through the air. A thin solid red spell shot through the air and struck the trunk of the tree where a small cut opened on it. Not very strong, is it? Terry asked with a disappointed expression. I could probably cut the tree down if I really wanted to, but this is practice for control, not power. I said as I walked over to the tree and tapped it with my wand episki. I said as a bright vibrant glow came from my wand and the cut closed in real time. Me next. Terry said eagerly as I walked away from the tree. He swung his wand sharply as he called out the incantation and the tip of his wand fizzled red but no spell came out, leaving him standing there awkwardly. Your wand movement was fine, but you need to put more emphasis on the fin part of the spell. Your mental image is also not strong enough. Mike, you try now. I said, and Mike drew his wand and made his own attempt. This time a weak red spell shot out but completely missed the tree and fizzled out before it hit the ground. In your case the intent is barely good enough and the pronunciation was spot on, but your wand movement was too large. Make it shorter, like you were trying to flick a grain of sand off a paper. I said helpfully. Terry tried again next and this time he got a weak dull red spell to come out and even hit the tree, but it only nicked the bark slightly. Your intent is too weak. What are you imagining when you cast the spell? I asked seriously. Scissors. He said, embarrassed. That would be fine if you were trying to cut paper or cloth, but for a tree like this imagine a sword instead. Try again. I said encouragingly. Defindo. He said with a focused expression as he flicked his wand, and this time the spell was solid and cut a shallow but very clear line into the tree's trunk. I did it. He exclaimed with an excited smile. Nice one, mate. Mike said, patting Terry on the back with a grin. Well done, but remember, a spell isn't mastered until you can use it every time without fail. This is but a taste. I said with a smile of my own. Mike went next and with a more controlled slash of his wand's tip a solid strong red spell shot out and cut a deep gash across the tree's surface, even cutting into the wood below the bark slightly. Not bad. You must have changed the intent you had from before. I said with an approving nod as I walked up to the tree and used the mending charm again to fix the damage. Yeah, I used a sword like you told him. He said, pointing at Terry. You must be familiar with swords then. You won't get such a strong reaction from it otherwise. I said, interested. My father is a history professor and has a few laying about the house. He said with a grin. Cool. Wait, what do you think about when you use the spell though? Terry asked, realizing I hadn't said that I use a sword as my image. Depends on how strong I want the spell to be. In this case a kitchen knife. I say honestly. 77, teaching, 2. A kitchen knife? Seriously? Terry asked incredulously. I chuckled at the sheer confusion they both had on their faces. I had seen far too much anime to dare imagine a sword for my spell. Those blades that cleave through steel or even split clouds would likely result in a ridiculously potent spell. By comparison, a kitchen knife, while still more than capable of slashing someone open, was much less impressive. More normal and thus perfect for a controlled use of the spell. You could say my image of a sword is a tad too much for simple practice like this. I said, and left it at that. Well, that's the cutting charm, but you said you wanted to practice the disarming and fire charms as well. Mike said, accepting my answer easily enough. For the disarming charm it's a thrusting motion with your arm while wanting to take the item away. I say item because despite the name of the spell it actually works on more than just things you might consider a weapon. It's anything being held at all. Food, quills, umbrellas, it all works the same. Here, watch. I explained before pointing my wand at the tree. Expelliarmus. I said, and a scarlet fast spell shot out and struck the tree, making it shake as its leaves all were torn off. Isn't that bad for the tree? Terry asked worriedly. It's September, mate, the leaves were all starting to fall anyways. I said, rolling my eyes. Why did they all come off though? Mike asked, confused. A slight miscommunication on my part. The spell doesn't only make its target drop a single held item but all held items. In this case that was all those leaves. It can do more too depending on your intent. For example, it can take your opponent's wand and even blast them backwards as well. It all depends on if you wish them harm or not. I explained honestly. Sounds wicked useful. Terry said, impressed. There's a reason it's a staple in magical duels after all. Since the tree won't work anymore, why don't both of you practice on me? Just try not to send me flying, okay? I said with slight joking tone. You sure? Terry asked with a reluctant look. Yeah, don't worry about it. I said with a nod. Mike went first and his spell barely created a slight tugging sensation on the stick I had chosen to use in place of my wand. There was no way in hell I was putting my actual wand at risk with this practice after all. I didn't say anything but motioned for Terry to try next, and he did a little better, but I still had hold of the stick in the end. For both of you it feels like you lack the resolve needed here. Give me a moment. I said with a sigh as I took out my actual wand and carefully cast the transfiguration spell on the tree. One of its lowest branches curled under its effect and turned into a rough facsimile of a hand that I then neatly placed the stick in. There. Now you can cast the spell without needing to worry about hurting me. I said, and they both sighed in relief. To no surprise at all, that made things much easier on them, as the stick was now launched out of the tree's grasp reliably. Teaching them the fire-making charm was even easier, as we were going to be casting it over the lake. I may have gone slightly overboard on this front, as my spell didn't create a normal small burst of flame, it made a flamethrower. Bloody hell! Terry exclaimed in shock at the sight, while Mike just stared in awe. Your turns, I said, playing it off. Both created a few small sparks on their first tries, but after I explained what they did wrong with the wand movements, they both managed a burst of flame. After that we each took turns practicing the 3 spells until lunchtime. We had a few watchers since we were practicing spells in the open, but no one bothered us about it. Lunch was a simple affair, as we went to the Great Hall, ate and then left again. This time for the common room, as Terry and Mike wanted to review their stuff for class tomorrow. I passed on that, as it was all stuff I had already mastered for the most part over the summer. For the next few hours I chose to vanish into the ROR to clear out a bit more of the stuff there. It wasn't much progress, but it was something at least. I didn't walk away with nothing besides coins for my effort either, as I found a rather interesting trinket as I was cleaning the place out. It was a small box made of iron with 3 latches on it and a series of 13 concentric circles on the lid with runes that spun. It was a puzzle box, one with something in it. Naturally I appraised it to see if it was dangerous, but according to my system it was merely hard to open but otherwise harmless. Naturally I was fascinated by the thing and even called it a day to try and guess the combination. A runechist. An excited voice called out in the common room, breaking my focus. I looked for the source of the sound and found myself peering at the 5th-year female prefect, Penelope Clearwater, as she snatched the box from my hands. Where on earth did you find this thing? Besides the one in Dumbledore's office, I've never seen another, she said excitedly as she moved the circles eagerly. I calmly reached up and took it back, leaving her speechless. It would be better if you asked before snatching things from people randomly, I said seriously. 78, approaching Dumbledore. Ah, come on, don't be like that. Do you have any idea what that is? That's a runechist. The method to create them was lost centuries ago, and the few still around are in collections or missing, she said pleadingly. And that's all well and good, but you still didn't ask before trying to snatch it from me. It's rude and inconsiderate behavior, I said calmly. Okay, so maybe I got a little ahead of myself, but can you blame me? I might never get another chance to really study a runechist in my life, so I simply had to take it, she said defensively. I can understand that, but there is an order to these things. In much the same way I'm sure Dumbledore would allow a student to study his own if they would merely ask politely. He can be a bit tricky in my experience, but quite approachable and helpful otherwise, I said seriously. And what experience can you even have anyways? She said with a scoff. He personally came to see me over the summer and even when I was in the hospital wing for the last 2 weeks. Perhaps not much experience, but more than most students, right? I said with a shrug. She frowned. Why would he come see you during the summer? She asked, confused. Oh well, I'm an orphan, you see. I should have been living in the orphanage, but instead I left it to take up residence in Tom's pub, the Leaky Cauldron. Dumbledore happened to have errands in Diagon Alley apparently and came to investigate the missing persons case the orphanage put out after I vanished without a word. He was quite understanding about my choice and assured me that I'd have no trouble about it. I explained honestly. Do you not care about the worry the orphanage people might have had for you? She exclaimed in outrage. I scoffed. I was treated like a freak there, a nuisance. They didn't care about that, so I doubt they cared about me actually being gone. No, more likely than not they were more worried about someone finding out I was missing and they got caught not having reported it, I said firmly. That's dreadful. How could anyone treat a child like that? She asked, horrified. I sighed. It doesn't matter. We are getting off topic anyways. If you want to study the box, ask next time. You could also just ask Dumbledore as well, since I'm definitely not letting you have mine. I haven't solved its riddles yet, I said casually. Riddles? She asked curiously. You mean to tell me you want to study the thing and don't even know that much? From what I've figured out just messing with this thing is there are 3 riddles, 1 for each latch. You solve them by spinning these circles until you get the right answers, like a safe almost. I haven't quite figured out the trick yet since I don't have the riddles themselves, but going through each possible combination until I get a reaction is rather fun, I said seriously. So it's basically just a more complicated safe? She asked, disappointed. I chuckled at that. So it seems. Probably why its crafting method was lost too. If you could just use a safe easier and cheaper, then why go through the trouble, right? I said casually. She just sighed at that and left me alone, which suited me just fine. Like I had told her, though, the box was basically just a smaller magical safe equivalent. Its crafting method being lost didn't surprise me at all, as that was just how advancement was sometimes. The less need there was for something, the less of that thing would be made, until eventually next to no one would remember how, and perhaps only books had the method recorded. Did this mean the thing was useless? No. What it meant was that its use had been taken by something better, and that's all. I wasn't interested in the thing for its usefulness to begin with, or even its contents. I just found puzzling over the combinations a stimulating way to pass time. Eventually, though, it was time for dinner and I put the box away before heading to the Great Hall with Mike and Terry. Dinner was good, but once again more of the same, further reinforcing my idea of introducing some variety to the menu. The question became how to do so without sending the entire castle into uproar. Perhaps I can ask Dumbledore. He might be interested in the idea since he was depicted as rather explorative with his sweets. I thought idly as I finished off my third whole roast chicken. Soon enough dinner ended and rather go back to the common room I waited for Dumbledore. He seemed surprised when I approached him but smiled all the same. "Good evening, young Alex, is there something I can help you with?" he asked curiously. "As a matter of fact there is. You see, I happen to have noticed that while the food is plentiful at the feasts the variety is a tad lacking. It's all delicious of course, but I was wondering if there might be a way to diversify the menu at all." I asked without holding back. He chuckled and his eyes gleamed with interest. "Oh, now this is an unusual and intriguing idea. Why don't we go to my office to discuss this in further depth?" he offered. I thought about it for a moment before nodding in agreement. "All right, I admit I have seen some interesting things written about that room I would like to see for myself. The portraits of the previous headmasters for example. The sheer volume of knowledge accumulated in those paintings must be staggering," I said eagerly. He smiled and nodded in agreement. "Yes, I often finding myself relying on their advice. They each bring a unique perspective and way of thinking to any troubles I might be having," he said with an appreciative tone. 79, Solemn Dumbledore. "How are you settling into things now that you are out of the hospital wing?" Dumbledore asked as we walked through the halls towards the stairs to the tallest tower. "It's been fairly normal all things considered. You'd think magic would make people different somehow, but everyone is the same as if it made no difference beyond a few actions and topics of conversation," I said honestly. "I always believe that actions make the man or woman's worth, not their ability," he said wisely. "Perhaps that's mostly true, but ability must also play a part. That's simply the way we are as humans," I said, not fully agreeing with him. "I suppose there's truth to that as well, though I wish it weren't so," he said with a melancholic look. "Do you say that because you once knew someone blinded by their own ability and took a dark path?" I asked, and he gave me a deep look. "Once, I was such a person. Myself and another, kindred souls you might say. I mended my ways after a tragedy and he followed through with that path until it cost him everything. Don't make the same mistakes, young Alex, ability is not everything," he said lightly. We walked in silence after that, though I knew who he was talking about thanks to my past life. Gellert Grindelwald, the Dark Lord before Voldemort. Dumbledore's past with him was touched upon and it was a tragic one. They were best friends and even lovers once in their youth. They shared a belief that wizards should rule the world and even made plans how to accomplish it. It all changed when they had a falling out that resulted in Dumbledore's sister dying. From then Dumbledore became a man of unity and cooperation between muggles and wizards, and Grindelwald one of dominance for wizarding kind. In the end their ideals clashed and they fought to decide the fate of the world. Dumbledore won and Grindelwald till this day remained imprisoned in Nurmengard. I could also understand why he'd share this with me. It was manipulation, plain and simple. He made things personal to make me empathize with him before internalizing what he wanted. I wouldn't be surprised if he had been paying close attention to me this whole time and thus saw me as a potential next Voldemort or even Grindelwald. Rather than just leave me to my own devices, he would try to guide me to a path he felt would be best. He wasn't trying to wrong me exactly, but nobody likes being manipulated. Besides, I didn't need him to try and teach me this lesson. I can't even begin to count the amount of times I saw that ability above all mindset lead people to the villainous side of things in video games or anime. At the same time, I didn't agree with those hero of justice types either. People weren't black and white but shades of gray. Some lighter and others darker, but I like to believe myself a neutral gray, maybe on the slightly darker side at most. Whatever the case, this manipulation attempt was noted and left alone as we arrived at the large stone gargoyle that guarded the way to the headmaster's office. It was shaped like a griffin with its wings raised up high. "Pepper Imp," Dumbledore said casually, and the gargoyle bowed and moved to the side, revealing a small spiral staircase leading to the office. He didn't say anything else but walked up the stairs and I followed behind. When we reached the doorway he pushed it open and I had to admit the place was a real sight. It was a fairly large round room with 2 stories and a balcony to the left. There were shelves of old or unusual items on the walls and even a curling bookshelf lined with ancient-looking books, a few I recognized from Gervain's collection. In the center of the room towards the back was a large wooden desk with papers and an inkwell with a quill. Just behind that was a large golden bird perch that had a magnificent creature sitting on it watching us enter, Fawkes the Phoenix. The bird had vibrant red and golden feathers with a slight royal purple tinge on a few. Its build was like an eagle's, and if it weren't for the raised crest feathers on its head and long tail feathers it might be mistaken for one from afar. Dumbledore seemed to notice the way I was looking at the bird and smiled. "That is Fawkes, a phoenix," he said as he took a seat behind the desk. "He's beautiful," I said honestly. "Oh, how do you know he is male?" he asked surprised. "Fantastic beasts and where to find them. Mr. Scamander mentions that male phoenixes have brighter plumages than females in the book," I say calmly. "Does he? Let me check," he said and waved his hand at the bookshelf, causing a single book to float off it and into his hand. I rolled my eyes at this blatant showing off but waited quietly for him to find the entry on the phoenix. It didn't take long as he quickly found the page and read its contents quickly before nodding. "He really does mention it briefly," I must admit I'm rather envious of your memory. Why, I sometimes forget where the latrines are and it causes no end of trouble. He said with a chuckle. I shrugged. Knowledge is power. I say calmly. A very Ravenclaw way of thinking. He said amused. The previous headmasters are there above you by the way in case you wish to introduce yourself. He added. 80, playing the game. I walked closer to the desk and turned to look at the wall above the door, and sure enough there were a few dozen portraits with little plaques naming them along with how long they served as headmaster. There was however a distinct lack of portraits from before Phillida Spore, who served as headmistress of Hogwarts till 1408 AD. Considering that Hogwarts was founded in the 11th century, there were several figures not present on the wall. Each headmaster was painted in a style popular during their times as headmaster, and most were asleep or pretending to be rather than bothering to possibly interact with a student. Good evening, headmasters. Alexander Drake, aspiring merchant. I said politely as I bowed slightly to the portraits. Humph. At least you have some manners even if your aspiration is a poor choice. The portrait of one Phineas Nigellus Black said snidely. Oh, please enlighten me why you'd think that. I asked, curious what he'd say. You are a wizard boy. Our kind should aspire for greatness, not selling cabbages like some common muggle. If you were to sell magical items that might barely be acceptable, still wasteful though. The Black Ancestor said with a disdainful expression. Oh, I can assure you, what I have to sell will be no mere trinkets or cabbages. Why, even now I happen to have a rather interesting creature on the way. A flaming bird that by description fits every pattern of a phoenix and yet isn't one. I said, knowing very well that would interest Dumbledore. Poached, no doubt. The portrait scoffed. Not as such, tamed with fair and legal methods. No magical enslavement involved. I said seriously. I must admit you have me more and more curious about where you keep obtaining these things. Dumbledore cut in with a raised eyebrow at me. I will keep that secret to myself, but when the bird arrives you can be the first to see it if you'd like. I'd offer the same to these esteemed headmasters as well, but the bird is of a scorching nature and might damage your portraits by mere proximity. I said calmly. I do believe I would in fact quite like to see this strange phoenix-like bird myself. When it does arrive, please do send me word. For now though, please have a seat so we can discuss your idea about the school menu. The old man said as he waved his hand and a chair appeared in front of his desk. I didn't miss the gleam in the man's eye as I sat down, but that was to be expected. I was showing part of my hand by openly announcing my acquisition of the Arc Phoenix soon, and his interest was piqued. This was both a spur-of-the-moment decision and a calculated one at the same time. Right now in this world and in Hogwarts specifically I lack any credibility, legitimacy. If I wanted to start openly making trades in the school, this old man in particular was my biggest obstacle. Basic things that could be found in this world would be easily explained away, but everything else would cause trouble. I needed him to eventually just ignore me pulling out odd things as a concern. The Arc Phoenix was a double-edged blade here. On one side it will increase his curiosity about where I'm getting this stuff from, but on the other it will make it so he accepts anything else much easier. For this to work out though, I had to go big right out the gate, and for him specifically a phoenix-like creature was just high enough to work without being too dangerous. If I chose something like a devil fruit instead, he'd probably immediately start playing hardball due to how damaging that could be in the wrong hands. The idea of something like a fruit that could give whoever ate it incredible power for almost no cost was the sort of thing that would shake society if discovered. I'm rather fond of not mysteriously disappearing, for the greater good, thank you. Now then, what did you have in mind exactly for the kitchens? He asked with a kind smile. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but the recipes followed have seen little change in a long time, right? I asked calmly. With a few special exceptions, that is correct. He said, nodding. My idea is simply introducing more recipes, a greater variety of dishes. It wouldn't even be particularly hard either. The house elves are already well versed in cooking, so once they learn the new recipes they can be added to the feasts. Naturally you wouldn't do a full overhaul all at once, but maybe swapping out 1 or 2 per meal until it gets full integrated shouldn't be a problem. I said seriously. He looked thoughtful at the idea and nodded. It is a good plan. A sort of slow modernization of the menu. Do you have any particular dishes in mind to start off with? He asked curiously. Fish and chips for one. Currently there's a distinct lack of seafood on the current menu. This is a mild enough dish that it wouldn't confuse anyone all that much while also enriching the palate. I said seriously. Ah, a Muggle staple here in the Isles. A solid first edition indeed. A notably familiar one as well for many of our Muggleborn students. He said with a pleased look. Familiarity is our friend here. If you add a strange dish no one recognizes, it might be entirely avoided rather than smoothly integrated. But if someone sees a friend or classmate excitedly grab the dish and eat it with gusto, the others might out of curiosity brave this unknown. I said seriously. 81, on guard. I'll ask someone to fetch a thorough collection of cookbooks for this matter then. For now though, I believe it best if you hurry off to bed now. Take this pass in case anyone on patrol finds you. He said, handing me a slip of parchment that literally just said Hall Pass and had his signature on it before shooing me out of the office. I admit it caught me off guard, as I fully expected this conversation to take longer, and it even appeared as though he also agreed since he brought me to his office to begin with. It took me all of 2 seconds to snap back and realize that I had been played with. Perhaps not maliciously, but played with all the same. Dumbledore brought me to his office to get me to relax. It was a subtle manipulation that played on the inbuilt habit of people to mentally relax in a private safe setting. He spoke softly and in a gentle manner like he was harmless and for a moment successfully made me forget he was one of the most powerful people on the planet. I wasn't even mad about it, to be honest. This was simply his own form of politics. This harmless image he cultivated along with his actual power drew people to him and made them trust him almost at first meeting. It wouldn't work on everyone, since once you realized the game he was playing you could guard against it, or if you were paranoid enough, gentleness was actually more suspicious than sternness. I had gotten too comfortable with his lack of pressing and slipped up. I won't make that mistake again. I left the office without a word and walked towards the Ravenclaw Tower at a steady rate after making that decision. The halls were cool and empty, with a few portraits idly watching as I walked past, but most settling in for the day. Meow. A feline voice sounded out loudly, drawing me from my thoughts. I looked towards the sound and spotted a mottled tabby cat approaching from the end of the hallway. It was a narrow thing with rough fur but seemed well enough cared for. "You must be Miss Norris, which means your owner should be nearby," I said calmly as I crouched down with my hand out to pet the cat. "Hands to yourself, rule breaker. My Norris isn't for the likes of you to touch," an angry raspy male voice yelled as the wiry old castle caretaker hurried over. "Not a rule breaker, Mr. Filch. I'm on my way to the common room from the headmaster's office. I even have a pass," I said respectfully as I produced the pass in question. The man's wrinkled fierce face scrunched up at that, and he snatched the pass out of my hand before eyeing it like it was dangerous before reluctantly returning it to me. "You are excused this time, but don't let me or my pretty here catch you breaking the rules. Off with you now. I have a feeling those red-haired brats are around and waiting for me to find," he said rudely. "Of course, have a good evening, Mr. Filch," I said calmly before leaving, even as he shifted uncomfortably at the politeness. The man was rather villainized by the majority of students and treated not so great as a result, so being given respect likely threw him off. I myself had the outside perspective of my past life that made it clear that he was merely doing his job. Even in the books where he acted in a way that was questionable, it was all hot air without substance, venting his frustration at worse. I didn't rush back to the common room since I wasn't fully familiar with the castle, but rather retraced my steps to a familiar area and then made my way to the common room. Mike and Terry were both waiting for me when I arrived. "Where've you been?" Terry asked curiously. "Having a conversation with Dumbledore. Nothing serious, but I won't ruin the surprise," I said playfully. "Please tell us you didn't get caught by Filch on the way back. We've heard stories of him and that cat of his from the upper years," Mike said with a shudder. "I did actually. He was pretty easy to handle as I just flashed my hall pass and he sent me off. A shame I didn't get to pet his cat," I said wistfully. "You tried to pet that thing?" Terry exclaimed in shock. "Yeah, it seemed pretty friendly to me," I said confused. "Mate, I've seen that cat hiss and scratch someone just for getting too close to it," Mike said seriously. I shrugged. "Guess I'm just built different," I said with a chuckle at my inside joke. They headed to bed after needling me to share what I talked to Dumbledore about, but gave up when I refused to share. It would be more fun watching their reactions when the new dishes started hitting the tables this way. I myself, however, headed for the bathroom to get in a bit of electrical body enhancement before rinsing off and going to bed myself. An interesting thing I noticed was that the foul oily sweat was coming less and less the more I did this, which, if we used those cultivation novels from my past life as a guide for, meant I had less impurities in my body. The next morning was a big one for me, however, as it was Monday and that meant my first official classes. It was charms and herbology, so I wasn't too nervous about it. I was almost guaranteed to be better than almost everyone else in herbology due to my theoretical knowledge alone, and actually guaranteed to be better at charms since I mastered the entire first-year book and was even learning stuff not in it. 82 First classes. I woke up early and got dressed in my school uniform before leaving my room and walking down the stairs to the common room. My hacky picked up the 6 older students already up and in the area as I walked. I wasn't surprised by this, as these few were all early risers in the house. In much the same vein, they weren't surprised at all to see me up so early either. We didn't interact though, as most of the time upper years didn't bother with lower years, with only 4 exceptions. The first was when it came to Quidditch, since the team was comprised of players from both upper and lower years. The second was the prefects helping or getting on to the lower years for whatever reason. The third was if the lower year approached a senior student for help in some matter, and as far as I have seen they rarely get it anyways. Finally was a personal dispute of some sort. I haven't seen this one yet, but I did hear some stories from Mike and Terry during our meals. For example, there was a brother and sister who got sorted into Ravenclaw years apart. The brother was in 7th year and the sister a 3rd year when the girl had a messy breakup with another student and ended up humiliated for it. The brother did as any good brother did and punished the ex-boyfriend, came up with a whole new potion that left the boy disfigured until an antidote was created. The story was told regularly as a warning in the house to the new students. Personally, I found this humorous since more or less Ravenclaw students were a cool-headed bunch. Anyways, I settled in on an armchair next to the animated Neazel skeleton that was grooming its non-existent fur with its non-existent tongue. I played around with a few minor spells while I waited for Terry and Mike to get up so we could head to breakfast and then charms together. None of the spells I was using were impressive or anything, as I was just messing around with the sparks and light spells to see if I could do anything interesting with them. For example, with the spark spell I was seeing if you could change the sparks from red and green to some other color using intent. As it turned out you could, but it was a tad tricky as you had to be fully focused on whatever color you wanted to succeed. My favorite was making golden or silver sparks. You have to add a second word to change the color of lumos. An upper year commented helpfully as I failed for the 6th time to do it with pure intent. Why? I asked curiously. Because white light is all of the colors of a rainbow. You have to specify which color or you get regular white light. He explained before demonstrating lumos virides. As he had said, by adding the specification to the spell it turned a bright green. I copied the modification to the spell and replicated the color change without any trouble at all. I noted that down in my head before also making a note to memorize Latin in my free time. Since most spells seem to use the language, it would be a good idea to fully master it early so I could try and create new spells or modify pre-existing ones. Thanks to my linguist skill, I would also find it easier to learn new languages born from Latin or similar to it. I tested a few other colors before Mike finally came into the common room rubbing his eyes. Bloody hell, Alex. Do you even sleep? He asked in disbelief. Built different, remember? I joked while offering a chocolate. More like built weird. He grumbled and snatched the sweet from me. Amen to that. Terry says with a yawn as he too walks over. You're just jealous. I said with a chuckle. Damn right we are. I'd give my left hand not to feel like a slug when I wake up. Mike said wistfully. We headed for the Great Hall after that and ate breakfast before hurrying to Charms. The classroom was a decently sized space with desks all lined up neatly at the sides and a large stack of books at the end that from the books I knew Flitwick stood on to be at eye level with his students. I followed Mike and Terry's lead to grab a seat next to them as the others came into the class. Malfoy and his 2 henchmen glared at me as they came in, but I ignored them like they weren't even there. His pathological need to live up to his father's expectations and thus be better than anyone else wasn't my problem to deal with. I also wasn't concerned with whatever tricks he might pull since he didn't even know about my hacky, much less know how to avoid it. Flitwick or another professor doing so was understandable, but definitely not Draco Malfoy, not now at least. Speaking of the good little professor, he came into the class as the bell rang and started the lesson. Much like last time, we are practicing the light charm, lumos, today as well as its counterspell, Nox. Remember to properly enunciate the words and perform your wand movements precisely. He said cheerfully. Lumos. I said casually and created a bright light from my wand. Well done, Alex. 5 points to Ravenclaw. The little professor said happily at the display. 83, first classes, 2. There were jealous looks from a few people struggling at this and a downright hateful glare from Malfoy and his gang. There were also impressed looks and even a few knowing ones from the few who had seen me, Mike and Terry practicing by the lake. Flitwick wasn't patting his own house's points though, as Hermione also earned 5 points for being the first Gryffindor to pull it off after being spurred on by competitiveness. I didn't brag though or show off by using the modified version I learned earlier, but turned to help the others who were struggling with the spell. Your flick is too deep, shorten it a tad. Try to imagine being in a dark room and desiring light. I'd say depending on the person. This earned me another 5 points from Flitwick, who was pleased to see me aiding the others. Mike and Terry grasped the spell shortly after Hermione as they refreshed their minds with the little tricks to spell casting I'd shared before. Hermione also tried to help the others near her, but she came across condescending with how aggressively she'd tell them how to improve. I knew better than that from working retail though, a softer touch works best with correcting others. By the end of class however you could see the difference in helping efficiency. The majority of those I helped either grasped the spell or were showing signs of almost getting it, while only a little improvement came from Hermione's helped group. I wasn't the only one who made that comparison though, as my peers and Flitwick also did. The professor sighed and didn't say anything, but my peers had no such troubles. Alex is obviously so much better than Hermione. I know, right? She's so bossy and didn't even get anyone to improve. Alex on the other hand had almost half the class using the spell by the end. I'm so jealous. He's so talented. These were a few examples of what was said, and Hermione definitely heard it if the look on her face said anything. I just shook my head at it all though, as Mike, Terry and I headed for the Great Hall to eat lunch. Honestly, I was kinda confused what the fuss was with the homework Flitwick gave us at the end. Basically he wanted a few paragraphs on the light charm and its uses. This wasn't a difficult thing at all to write though, admittedly slightly tedious. Most of my peers were blockhead children, which was fair given their ages, and couldn't imagine uses for the charm beyond simply creating a light. Anyways, lunch was a simple affair of showing up and eating before heading to our final class of the day, Herbology. This class was almost purely practical in nature as we had to head directly to the greenhouses for it. Professor Sprout was clearly a smart teacher, as the class was specifically on mixing fertilizer and using it on the various plants. This was smart because many of these kids came from families where the idea of doing stuff like this was unthinkable. I was of course referring to the majority of the purebloods in this case. By having them get their hands dirty like this, the professor was humbling them even if only a little. At the same time, this was also useful knowledge to have, as certain plants needed different mixtures of fertilizers to flourish. For example, predatory plants like the devil's snare needed bone meal mixed into their fertilizer. The biggest turn-off to herbology though had to be the smell. Since most magical fertilizer was made using dragon dung, the stench of the dung itself was incredibly strong. I gagged at it personally at first exposure, but once I got used to it there wasn't much problem. Unlike charms though, I couldn't really show off in herbology without looking like it. Getting ratios for different fertilizers right wasn't exactly hard, as it was just a matter of scooping, weighing and then adjusting amount until it was correct. As for identifying magical plants, nobody asked, so volunteering the information looked bad. That's an itching vine, the leaves are toxic. I warned Terry as he went to poke a bright purple fuzzy vine. Good spotting, Mr. Drake. 5 points to Ravenclaw. Now can you tell us what itching vine is used for? Professor Sprout said, seeing a teaching opportunity to liven things up. It's got several uses depending on what you use from it. The roots are used for blood clotting potions, the stem and juice for antidotes, and the leaves for itching powder. I said without hesitation. Very good. Another 5 points to Ravenclaw. Now then, for your homework I want each of you to write 3 inches on the itching vine for our next class. She said pleased as she dismissed us. I can't believe I almost touched that thing. Thanks for stopping me. Terry said as we left with a horrified expression. It's fine, I'd expect one of you to do the same if you spotted me about to make a mistake like that. I said with a shrug. So how'd you even know what it was anyways? Mike asked curiously. When I was in the hospital wing, the professor brought a bunch of plants for me to identify from the textbook. That was one of them. Nasty plants, really. It's that fuzz on them that gets you. It's actually a bunch of needle-like stuff that has a toxin on them, so they get under your skin when you touch them. I explained and they both paled. Sounds like I really dodged one then. Terry said with a shudder. 84, canary tail. If it's just the plant and not the refined itching powder from its leaves, getting it fixed isn't hard. You just need an antidote to the toxin and a spell to get the needle-like bits out of your skin. The cure for boils potion is also an acceptable alternative to treating it. I said with a shrug. How? That potion is only for boils, right? Mike asked confused. You haven't read the book very carefully, have you? It's how the potion works that makes it useful here. Most boils are from something being in the skin causing pus and swelling. The potion works to draw these things out and get rid of them. The plant's needle-like bits are a problem because they get stuck in the skin, hence the potion works on them. I said seriously. What about itching powder then? Terry asked, curiosity sparked. I shook my head. Itching powder is different as it fuses into the skin rather than piercing it. This means treating someone hit by it requires flat out removing the skin affected. Technically there is 4 ways to solve this. The first is to wait a few days for that layer of skin to come off on its own, as is natural. The second is to basically fully sunburn every part hit with the itching powder, causing it to peel off within a day. The third is to use a potion to dissolve the powder fused into the skin so it simply vanishes harmlessly. Finally is just taking off the skin directly. I explained frankly. Yeah, I think I won't ever touch that stuff now. That all sounds bloody dreadful. Mike said with a shiver. Probably for the best. I nodded in agreement. So what do you guys have going for the rest of the day? Terry asked, changing the subject. I was going to tidy up the homework before reading the book I checked out of the library. Might get some practice in too if I finish it fast enough. I said calmly. I suppose I'll also tidy up the homework before maybe playing chess for a bit. Mike said with a shrug. You know the homework is not due for a few days, right? Terry asked, exasperated. Yeah, but if I do it now I can just relax until it's due. Procrastinating is a bad habit that rarely ends well. I said seriously. What he said? Mike said. Fine, I guess I can do the homework too. No fun at all. Terry complained. The trip to the common room was uneventful, and even after we got to work on our homework there wasn't much to talk about. I double-checked my own homework as the ink dried on the paper, and satisfied with it I put it away and brought out the charms book I checked out. I finished that too about an hour before dinner and chose to practice an illusion spell in it. A canary? Seriously? Mike asked incredulously as a small yellow bird chirped and flew around the common room. I held out my wand as the illusory bird landed on it. Don't underestimate a canary. There's even a tale where a god won a bet with one. I said with a smile. Really? What is it? Terry asked intrigued, and a few others who overheard me leaned in to listen as well. The tale goes that a couple of mortals had an argument about who was superior between the god of madness and the god of the hunt. The gods themselves came to hear of this argument and naturally decided to compete. The terms of the challenge were that both had a year to create and train up a champion, and at the end of the year these champions would meet in a fight to the death. The last one standing's patron would be declared the superior god. I said before pausing for drama. What happened next? Mike urged impatiently. The god of the hunt summoned a great reptilian demon beast that he then empowered with claws sharp enough to rend steel, fangs dripping with poison and skin harder than stone. He then cursed the beast with insatiable maddening bloodlust and lycanthropy. This monster stood toweringly and was greatly feared by all who beheld it for its savagery and stature. I said before pausing again. The god of madness must have had a canary then, right? One of the upper years said in disbelief. Indeed. When the year was up the two gods met with their champions. The god of the hunt with his great monster and the mad god with but a small colorful bird singing cheerfully on his finger. The god of the hunt scoffed at this and even loudly admonished himself for expecting the mad one to truly take this seriously. Still, a battle to the death was the terms, and a battle there was. I paused again dramatically as they all sat at the edge of their seats in interest. The great monster ravenously and without mercy swung its claws at the small bird but missed as the bird was nimble and hopped about, still singing cheerfully though on its shoulders and head. This caused the great monster to grow enraged and ruthlessly slash its stone skin and tear apart its flesh to try and kill this small cheerful annoyance. Soon enough the god of the hunt could only grow sour as his great beast destroyed itself until it perished, and on its ravaged corpse stood the small cheerful bird still singing as though it was never in danger. I said with a smile as the illusory bird on my wand chirped cheerfully, drawing all eyes to it in wonder. 85. Sudden trouble. Another tale? Terry demanded, and the others listening nodded and chimed in with agreement. I shook my head as I dispelled the illusion, letting the bird's image vanish in a puff of mist. Yes, mist. The charm I used to create it was falsa species, which apparently translated to mirage in Latin. What it did was create a small cloud of mist that you could shape into a false image that also had sound for some reason. The truth though was that no matter what you created, it was merely an illusion covering a bit of mist. I of course shared this with Mike and Terry, but neither of them were all that interested in it. Understandable really, since the spell was not one with much substance to it. I personally thought it a great tool for storytelling or distractions. Right now I wasn't skilled enough with it to use it for the first part, but the second didn't need complexity. Still, I was quite happy with my learning speed of the spell, as it only took me about 30 minutes to successfully cast it the first time. No time for another tale unless you want to miss dinner, I said, pointing at the clock on the wall. They all looked and sighed, as I was right about not having time since it was 5 minutes till dinner time. Where'd you learn that tale? Mike asked curiously. Took it right out of my mind, I said with a chuckle as we set out for the Great Hall. You've gotta have more, right? Terry asked eagerly. Plenty. That was only one of the stories about those gods, even. There are plenty others. Like the tale of the woman who wished to make music like the birds, or perhaps the tale of the grey fox, I said, teasing them with titles without any explanations. Come off it, mate, don't leave us in suspense, Mike said pitifully. You'll just have to wait until I feel like telling a story again, I said with a grin as they both groaned. I stiffened however as I suddenly felt a massive surge of electrical energy roll in the air. It came out of nowhere, as while the sky was overcast as was normal in this part of Scotland, there was no thunder. Now though, it was as if a massive thunderhead had simply manifested from nowhere. The sheer electrical charge in the air from it was impossible to ignore for me as the user of the Goro Goro no Mi. Suspicions of tampering rose, but I chose to ignore the strange phenomenon for now. The professors at their table clearly knew something about this, as when we arrived they had stern expressions. The enchanted sky of the Great Hall also showed constantly rumbling bright flashing clouds over the school. There was also a strange old man sitting politely near the professors, who kept anxiously glancing at the enchanted sky like he was waiting for something. Is that a bowtruckle? I thought in surprise as a small stick-like head poked out of the old man's chest pocket with leafy growths on it. Bowtruckle were small creatures between 3 and 6 inches tall that looked like thin tree branches given life. They had bark-like brown skin and green, yellow or red leafy growths on their heads and arms to blend into the trees they lived on. Specifically trees with magical quality to them, as noted in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. The things were also notoriously shy and timid of people, so seeing one in a wizard's pocket threw me off. Still, besides giving the strange unknown wizard a careful observation, I chose to focus on eating since my growth wouldn't fuel itself. The strange wizard also ate with the professors while chatting awkwardly with them and occasionally checking the ever-increasingly violent thundering sky overhead. I felt it before I heard it, a sort of sharp uptick in electrical energy before a series of loud, very distinctly avian cries filled the air. I almost couldn't help it as I drew the energy in the air into myself like soaking in the world's best bath. Bloody hell! Terry exclaimed, drawing me back to reality and noticing many eyes locked on me and quickly understanding why. Sharp electrical sparks were crackling over my form like flashes of silver blue that I hadn't realized I was releasing as I soaked in the electrical energy. I coughed awkwardly as I cut off the show and hastily excused myself. I wasn't shy or anything, but getting stared at by so many people was quite uncomfortable. I wasn't even focused on that though, but the sheer weirdness I was feeling. It was horrifyingly comfortable to just relax and soak up the static in the air, to the point I genuinely struggled not to. I was fairly sure I knew what was causing the strange weather, but what I couldn't figure out is why one or more of those things were here of all places. Thunderbirds, a cousin of the phoenix that lived in the arid environment of Arizona in America and could summon storms at will and detect danger. If they were brought here by poachers but managed to escape, that would be one thing, but I had this sneaking suspicion that wasn't the case. I didn't know why they were here in the cold, wet Scottish Highlands, but I really needed them to leave or things would get awkward for me. I was helpless, my body was practically fiending for the energy in the air and in those clouds. It was like denying the impulse to breath or eat when hungry, doable but very uncomfortable. 86, David. The air smelled of sterilizers and oil as I sat in Vic's ripper chair as he probes and prods the crazy metal prism Alex had sent me. Can't say I'm an expert at reading faces, but the expressions the old man was making at the screen showing the readings were making me nervous. He sighed and rubbed his eyes before looking at me. Be honest with me, kid, is this supposed merchant friend of yours a corp researcher? He asked seriously. Definitely not. I said honestly. What a joke, Chum's a bona fide wizard for Chrome's sake. Can't even imagine someone like him slaving away for some core interest when they'd sooner stab him in the back. Then I have no damned clue how he got something like this thing. Kid, as far I can tell this shit shouldn't even exist. We aren't talking fresh from the lab level tech here, but stuff so advanced it's decades, maybe even centuries, ahead of everything else. Forget you, the core would probably kill everyone in Night City for this thing 3 times over. He said, wiping sweat from his brow. Is it really that big a deal? I asked, shocked. I don't even know what the hell this thing can do all the way, too advanced, and that encryption might as well be in another language. What I do know though is that at the very least this thing is a neural interface the likes of which make even your Sandy look like a party toy. Don't even get me started on the readings this thing gives off, at least 3 alloys I can't identify and some kind of miniaturized energy core that's putting off an unknown form of radiation. He said seriously. Is it safe? I asked worriedly. As far as I can tell, but I really recommend tossing the thing and forgetting it ever existed rather than chipping it in. He said sternly. I shook my head. I trust my chum, hasn't let me down yet. I said determined. He sighed, alright, but let me know immediately if things start going wrong. He said disapproving but not trying to talk me out of it. He stabbed an injector in my arm at my wrist and typed in some stuff in the panel before stabbing an injector into his forearm that was pock-marked with many needle holes from doing that often. His ripper glove that was a series of wired tools on his fingertips danced across my wrist as the skin was peeled off and the muscles and nerves expertly moved and set aside as he placed the prism in place and began to connect my flesh to the chrome and my neural port pathway to it as well. The moment he did, everything changed as code and strange symbols scrolled across my feed and the prism lit up with a faint white glow at the center of it. Is this normal? I asked nervously. What is it, kid? What are you seeing? He asked seriously as he looked over my plugged-in neural link data. There's all this code and weird symbols moving across my optics. I said honestly. He looked at the data on the panel for a bit before answering. It looks like the thing is recalibrating your chrome in real time to suit itself. I've never seen anything like it. Your neural load is dropping rapidly though, so it looks like it's for your benefit at least. He said with an amazed expression. Specimen implant 19932 recalibration and reboot complete. Admin connection severed. Authorization passed to host party. Specimen implant full access mode alpha granted, all functions available. These words appeared in my optics in that strange glowing blue text, and the strange bit in my arm started transforming under both of our astonished gazes. The metal that seemed to have no seam split and shifted like a flower blooming as the light coming from it turned a bright red. Immediately I also sort of just knew how to use the thing's functions and even what they were. A space bound to my ability to carry things, a series of innate stats that I could raise by leveling up, an empty list of blueprints that I could instinctively craft if I had the materials and chrome control with a thought. Even for the list of empty blueprints there was an option to access the local network to download all viable options. I couldn't help myself and thought about doing exactly that. The lights flickered in the clinic as the thing on my arm took control of my neural link cable's flow of data and started pulling information back to it. Kid, talk to me. What's happening? Vic demanded in a panic. The implant, it's downloading blueprints. I said unsure. What blueprints? He demanded, staring at the flashing screen. All of them. I said in awe. That's impossible. His voice a whisper of denial, but the proof was staring us dead in the face. It only took a few moments, but when the thing now part of me was finished I confirmed it. Miles of blueprints of every type. Weapons, vehicles, buildings, chrome, armor, medicine, workbenches, tools, everything. I had the entirety of humanity's collective creative knowledge that was on the net right there, plain as day. Dear God. This changes everything. I thought I'd seen everything but that. He pointed at the thing in my wrist. That thing is something else. Keep it safe, kid. That thing is a ticket to the top of the world, maybe further. Just remember me when you get there, alright? He said with the most serious look he's ever given me.
Hi guys. I made a paid service in Telegram where you will find a great collection of fanfiction audiobooks organized and regularly updated. What you get? An unlimited access to the full audiobook library. New fanfiction audiobooks added regularly. You can play audios directly from Telegram anytime. Joining our service is available through a monthly subscription of $5. You can pay using PayPal or Ko-fi. So what are you waiting for? Send me a message on Telegram or Discord. I will provide the payment details. After the payment is confirmed, you will receive access to the private Telegram channel containing all audiobooks. If you enjoy fanfiction and prefer listening instead of reading, this library is made for you. Message me anytime to join.